Today is December 21st, 2015. It is 7:05 p.m. We'll call to order this meeting of the Development Review Board. The first item of business is to go through my opening remarks. I think most of you are veterans of these, but I read them at every meeting anyway, so please tolerate it. And for people who are new here, this is an explanation of what's going to happen procedurally and how we conduct our hearings. At the DRB, we hear applications for land development in the town of Brattleboro and appeals of zoning administrative decisions. Procedurally, the Development Review Board operates on the record. Broadly, this means we take a clear record of testimony from the applicant and any interested parties and then issue a written decision with our findings. Applicants and members of the public should be aware that as we are on the record, this is your opportunity to comment on and provide evidence relating to an application. In the event our decision is appealed to the Environmental Court, the court will not take or consider additional testimony at its hearing, but will look at the evidence from our hearings, the regulations or applicable law, and determine if the evidence supports the findings and decision that this board makes. Only interested persons that participate in this proceeding may appeal a decision made by the board, so I strongly encourage you all to speak up at this hearing. As we're on the record, we're going to ask that you affirm that your testimony will be truthful. So with the applicants and anyone who thinks there's any possibility that they may testify, please raise your right hand, and I'll say, do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the cause under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Okay. That's everybody in the room, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Applicants require a majority of the full board to succeed. That's 4 votes out of 7. As you can see, we have 6 people here tonight, but you still need a 4-vote majority to pass any application. If we don't have a full 7, we do consider requests to continue until we will have a full 7. That doesn't mean we have to grant them. But if you wish to have a full board of 7 hear your applications, please let us know that you want to continue your application for that purpose, and we'll consider it. After taking testimony, the board will close the public hearing and may vote on your application. The board will issue a written decision within 45 days of the close of the hearing. While we may vote on an application, it is the written decision that controls the timeline for appeal. And this is a divergence from my normal opening remarks. This is our first meeting with new zoning ordinances. The zoning ordinances were completely rewritten. We just received a new package, and we're making decisions on tonight's applications that weren't filed and continued from prior meetings based on the new ordinances. Accordingly, unlike most meetings where we would hold our vote in front of you and make a decision, we're going to take each application under consideration so that the board has time to review the new ordinances and consider what new wrinkles they may present. Because even though many of these issues we deal with regularly, we're dealing with law that we have yet to establish a level of comfort with. So we'll try not to do this for too long, but for now we want to make sure we get the law right, and that's going to require more deliberation than normal. It should be noted that the town of Brattleboro is a party with an interest in land development applications. The town does not have a special status before this board. They are just a party. Documents provided to the board by the town planning department, town attorney, or other town departments will be considered in exactly the same way as information from the applicant and all other interested parties. The first item of business tonight is to confirm that that our meeting has been properly warned.
It has been.
Okay. Disclosure of conflicts of interest and ex parte communications. I have a conflict of interest with application 2015-240. That's Cersosimo Industries Incorporated. Are there other conflicts of interest that people wish to disclose?
I have with 2015-204.
Okay, we're going to continue that anyway. Are you comfortable voting on the motion to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. I will. Don't worry. Any other conflicts of interest? I have one ex parte communication to discuss. I got an email relating, I think, to application 2015-240, asking about the scheduling order tonight. And I directed Mr. Bannon to respond to it. I have a conflict for other reasons in that application anyway, and there's no necessity that I conflict out for that reason, I don't think. Any other ex parte communications? Okay, the first item of business is to review our minutes from our November 16th, 2015 minutes. Meeting, excuse me. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved.
Okay. Second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and one other item of new business. We have a new member of the Development Review Board, Dave Whittle. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have a full schedule tonight, and I want to get right into it. But first, there are two applicants who have moved to continue their application. Application number 2015-204, E&C Properties LLC, and application 2015-220, Delta Epsilon Incorporated. They both asked for a continuance to our meeting in January, which is January 20th.
Yes.
Could I have a motion to continue both of those to that meeting?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. The first application is 2015-140 Cersosimo Industries Incorporated. Because I'm conflicting out, Mr. Bushy is going to chair this application.
Peter? Project.
Okay, what we're asking for approval for some additions and changes down at the main mill of Cersosimo down in 142. And I think most people here are probably familiar with the main mill. This Vernon Town line is right here. This is 142 on this plan. The long mill is right here. And the two areas we're going to be talking about is an addition to the office building in this location and a replacement dry kiln in this location. We demolish a larger dry kiln, we replace it with a smaller, more efficient dry kiln. That's essentially what we're here for.
And was there a waiver? No, there's no waivers on this at all, right?
I think we need to talk about some of the issues related to the new zoning ordinance.
Right.
I'm not sure they require waivers, but I think they require determinations by the board, with certain criteria.
Right, as far as the parking?
That type of thing. Yeah.
Right, okay. Okay, so you want to go ahead with it, with what your, is that all of it right there? Just those two
Well,
items?
I've got more detailed sheets. As we
Okay.
get into here, if we need them, we'll use them.
Okay.
And that type of thing. So the office is going to be a two-story addition to the existing office. It'll look essentially like the existing office with a red clapboard siding and so forth. It's 1,000 square foot footprint. It's 2 stories, so it's a little more than 2,000 square feet. The new kiln is 3,885 square feet. The old one was 7,250 square feet.
Okay.
Okay, so it's quite a difference. There's a way of talking about the impacts on the campus. The number of employees is essentially going to stay the same. They expect to have 2 more employees in the office building.
Right.
The campus itself, there's probably approximately 80 employees at the site at this point.
And where do they all park now?
They all park, well, most of the employees park in this area here, which is in front of this kiln being replaced, and kilns here,
Yeah,
and a storage building here.
Did-
And they double park there on either side,
yeah.
all through there.
Did you say 80 vehicles? Is that one shift or two shift, or 80 employees?
80
Is that-
employees, I didn't say,
So is that mean typically 80 vehicles?
I counted when I went to Google Earth about 55 vehicles.
Yeah.
I was gonna say 50. I mean, a lot of the guys share some rides, you know, we've got some guys that come from up the valley, so there's
Gotcha.
4 in a car, or this or that, so there's certainly not 80.
So two more is not.
Right.
I
And
didn't-
there's kind of, in the front of the office is parking also. And there's about 9 spaces there, plus another 3 over on this side.
So how many would you count the total that you have?
Do I have total parking spaces? One second. Well, guess I didn't write that down, but it's in that range, 50 to 60 parking spaces out there.
So will there be any significant change in the flow or the circulation there or anything?
No, circulation's gonna stay exactly the same
Or parking?
for parking and so forth.
It'll all stay the same as what it is now?
That's exactly right. There's no need for any changes. The access, for example, to the office will be through the same areas. There's a front door here, there's a handicap access on the south side. There will be a stairway. I guess somebody who's gonna be in that office probably will have some need to get out without walking through the whole office out into the yard, basically. So there will be a new access here. So this building will have an elevator now, which it hasn't had before, although it's got employees that are well, I don't know if she's handicapped, but she's certainly
Limited access.
limited access, right?
Less than mobile.
Yes, well, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so that's the story with that. With this, there's a block building here that's in disrepair, not very energy efficient. That's coming down, being replaced by the kilns, just like the ones that was approved a couple of years ago and built here.
Right?
It's got a, I guess that's aluminum side, isn't it?
Aluminum siding,
Yes,
yes.
yeah. So it will look a little different there. There will also be, because it's going to be a smaller area, there'll be a grassed area between that new building and where the existing building is now in the pavement out there. Yeah, all of the activity in the yard takes place essentially in this area here. The access for vehicles coming from off-site enters through this entrance here, often loads and unloads here and exits here. There's also some that enter here, drive between the parking here, up to here and load in this area and exit there. So those points are all very important to keep also for emergency points of view too, to access the whole yard. So we're not proposing any changes there. Obviously, we're saying that there isn't any change in traffic. We're not talking about it that way. Lighting, we're not proposing any changes in lighting. Cersosimo's been working with Efficiency Vermont through the years, and I guess basically all the exterior lights have been changed to LEDs in the last couple of years out there.
Is there anything over 20 feet out there?
I don't think so.
20 feet
high?
for lighting?
Yeah, unless it's on the building or something inside. There's nothing on the exterior.
Nothing on the buildings we're talking about. The only one that may be, maybe one light right on the south of the office, Peter, on the front of the sawmill, right along Route 142. That's that fixture may be above 20 feet. It's right around 20 feet, I would say, but it's been there for some
Looks like
time.
the new one has the limits at 20 feet on those. Is there any new lighting?
No, new lighting proposed for the exterior.
How are you dealing with any runoff?
Okay, well, there's a couple existing systems out there right now. So the additional runoff from this will end up running into the existing system and across and out here, okay? This one actually the roof pitches back, so it'll end up falling onto this green area, running across that before it gets to, like it does now, run out on this pavement and get collected out here. So, in fact, we've got a reduction in impervious area by 2,544 square feet on the whole project. So actually less runoff exiting the site. This,
When you say reduction of impervious area, you mean the size of the building, right?
I'm talking about pavement or roof.
Oh,
compared-
pavement total?
Yeah, pavement and roof compared
Okay.
to what's called grass or green.
Right.
Okay.
But that's, the size of that you said was reducing, right?
Right.
But you're not replacing that with grass where the reduction is, are you?
Yes, right here we are.
Oh, in that square, okay, I didn't see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's exactly what we're doing. This is in the flood, some of this is in the floodplain. So we need to get approval in regard to that also. This building will be above the base flood elevation, so that's not an issue. This building, the back end of it is above this side of it. The side towards the river is in fact higher than the base flood elevation. But the doors on this side are actually about a foot below.
Right,
Okay?
What, are they notched down in the foundation or something?
Yeah, well, we're gonna do one of two things. And I don't have an answer for you right now because the building isn't totally designed. We're either gonna do what we just talked about, which is the louvers on the side of the building, one of the doors,
Yeah.
or we will make it watertight. It's only a foot of water anyway, so it's not a big deal. So what I'm gonna suggest on that is that you put a condition, if you choose to permit this, put a condition thing that we get back to Brian with exactly what we're gonna do with the thing for the design for
The final design?
yes.
So have you thought about putting in any electric car chargers or, I don't know if anybody bikes to work, but there is some requirement in the new regs about bike storage.
Yeah, we certainly could put a bike rack in, certainly in here. That's not an issue, so if they want to make that a
Behind
condition-
the office?
Yeah, someplace.
What
else.
about chargers?
Chargers, I don't know if there's any place for them right now, and because we're not increasing the parking spaces, not developing what it says in the ordinance. It says if you're developing more than 40 parking spaces, but we're not developing any additional. So at this point, we're not proposing it until it becomes more of a viable thing. So we're not at this point.
But you're not going to move any of the parking off the front of the building?
No, we're not. We can't. There's no place to do it. Okay, I mean, again, all of this area, this is the alley between the kilns, which obviously they're in and out of those. This is storage and so forth out here. They're in and out. Four forklifts that work down there, plus a loader.
Yes.
Moving material. So you can see it's really active through that whole area, out in here and so forth. So there really is no place. This is the only place to have the parking. It's convenient, it's slow, it's close, it's safe, and it's out here. So it makes sense.
By safe, you mean as opposed to across the road?
As opposed to across the road. They did years ago park across the
Right.
road.
At one point, it seemed like you always used to see the guys.
Yeah, and that's not a great situation.
Right.
So, this is a much safer situation. Landscaping, there really isn't any place we can add any landscaping. This pavement from that building to there is 70 feet. 64 feet is your normal, parking lot width for double stacking. And of course, we've got trucks and forklifts going through there too at times. So it's wise to keep it that wide. The right-of-way line is that line right there. There's about, there's maybe 4 feet between the right-of-way and the edge of the existing pavement. And the power line runs right through here. So there is a little green right there, but it's not really an area that we can put anything in.
You mean an underground line?
No, it's an overhead.
Peter, would there be any opportunities to put some sort of durable perennials along that?
Yes. I mean, it's, you know, it's not, it's an area that gets a lot of snow and from both directions, and, you know, I don't really think it's practical, you know, really, in that whole area. And, you know, this has looked the same way it has for years. There's nobody across the road. If anything, it's gonna look better, because the building's gonna look better. You know.
You haven't planted anything at all in that space because you didn't think it would survive? Pretty much?
I don't think anybody really even thought about it. And the problem is, you know, AOT won't let you put anything in there right away.
Right.
You know, most of that area is actually theirs.
Gotcha. Any questions?
I'm good.
Ryan?
Peter, is there going to be any net fill?
No, there'll be actually about 10 cubic yards less fill, and we did it on purpose because we wanted to make sure we balanced out the, we didn't want to have infill so that we were taking up some of the storage of the, you know, for the flood type situation. So what we did is, by regrading this around here, we could make up for it.
So you said most of the stormwater from that mostly asphalt area goes into a culvert and across the way?
Yes, there's a system that picks it up. There's actually two systems. One,
By system, do you mean some sort of treatment?
no, there's the only
Just-
treatment
just
is
culvert system.
Culvert system, catch basins and culverts. Okay, there is a treatment for, interestingly enough, for the south end of the project, which has
Where all the
water
sprinklers are.
storage and that type of thing,
Yeah.
because that stuff, of course, is a little different than
Right.
what we're talking about here. So there is a treatment system at the south end.
So, where is the electrical system for the new kiln?
Field. Well, you could probably,
The electrical,
Is it, I mean, is it flood proofed? Is it high?
oh, yes,
Yeah,
everything.
it's above. There's-
Oh, yeah.
It's above?
There's a big pad mount transformer here,
Mhm.
already
I
existing,
see that on the.
which will remain.
And that area happens to be above the 100-year flood right there, too.
And then that electrical feeds, there's a common control room here, which all the controls and electrical work for this building here would come from that same control room. That's where all the steam is and all the conduits and whatnot to go to the motors would come from that same building. So electrically, nothing really changes for the structure that's already there.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
you still thinking, or?
Yeah, no, I'm just reading the rest of these conditions on here. They tell you, you said the electric charges you can't, you have no place you could do those?
We didn't say that. We just said that we weren't prepared to do that at this time. And per the ordinance, we don't really need to because we're not adding any parking or we're not
Gotcha.
adding over 40
You're not developing
spaces.
parking, okay. Yeah. Is there any asbestos in those kilns that you're taking down?
I don't think so. I know we'd have to get some stuff tested in the roofs and whatnot, but they're basically block kilns. And the block, I think, has either no insulation or vermiculite in it. And the ceilings themselves are actually what they call lightweight concrete, which was concrete with vermiculite. But, you know, with any of those kilns, to demolish them, we'd have to get it tested. They're the same.
Vermiculite often has asbestos in it.
So they're the same vintage. We took down, I think, 6 kilns 3 years ago, and I don't believe those kilns had any in it. But we're gonna look, because they're all made,
Right.
you know, 3 years apart from this kiln or that kiln or whatever, but this was all back in the 50s and 60s, so.
Does anyone else on the board have any questions? Anyone? Brian, do you have any questions?
Just to reemphasize, just closing the hearing. Closing the hearing and then deliberating afterwards.
Gotcha. Anyone in the public, any questions? No? So we're going to close the hearing to go into your office and have a deliberative session to discuss this to make sure we're,
I think all the deliberative sessions will be combined.
okay. So we'll do it at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not going to vote on this now. We'll vote at the end.
You can just vote to close the hearing.
We'll vote to close the hearing on this 2015-240 Cersosimo Industries Incorporated for major site plan, local act 250 and flood hazard approval. Anyone make that motion?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So, yeah. Thank you. James?
Where is James? Is he out there? We got more people.
We're on the record, we're on TV, and this way I can take one little thing out from the future application. So if you weren't here when I started this meeting, why don't you stand up and raise your right hand and I'll swear you in. Do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the cause under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury? As long as you say I do, while we're recording, we'll take that. They'll prosecute you later if you mess it up. Okay, I think Mr. Bush will be back in just a second. The application that we're going to next is application 2015-242, which is the Museum and Arts Center. And if you'd like to just get yourself set up, perhaps we can be a little bit efficient here and get started right when Mr. Bushy gets back. Okay. So Mr. Bushy is back, and before the board are two applications, 2015-242A and 2015-242B. I understand that the applicant wishes to proceed on A, but continue B, is that correct?
Not entirely.
It depends on the
What's
result
that?
today.
Depending on the result of A? Okay.
I didn't know we
Okay.
had two applications.
No, perhaps?
I'm not sure if I warned it correctly, Bob.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't entirely sure if you were asking for site plan approval and flood approval at this point, or just flood variance. If you can
Okay.
clarify what you.
Sure. Okay,
Why don't we start with that, and then we'll go into the usual
sure.
colloquy.
Let me just, should we begin?
Yes,
So
please.
Bob Stevens with Stevens and Associates. And
Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center.
so I think at this time, we're really just looking for a variance from the flood hazard provision of the ordinance. This application pertains to the Arch Street building, which is a little building down in the urban center. Down Arch Street, it was a mill building, historically turned into other industrial buildings over the years, until Leo Berman renovated it, I guess, in the 1990s for some housing units, and then it's been abandoned since 2001. So this is a...
Can somebody close that door? I'm sorry. Excuse me, Bob. It's
That's
just,
okay. So this is a sort of a, well, it's a vacant building down a side street in the urban center. It is in the, one edge of it is in the Whetstone Brook. The building's currently owned by Green Mountain Power, and BMAC, actually, I should correct that, BMAC I think now does own the building. They have purchased it, or it was through a gift, I guess you'd say, from Green Mountain Power to BMAC, who would like to figure out how to repurpose the building. It's a brownfield site, it has structural issues. We've been working for some time to kind of identify what the issues with the building are. One of the constraints and the reason we're here tonight, if you look at drawing C1 in the packet that we submitted, you'll see 3 lines on there that represent the boundaries from the floodplain map. The one closest to the brook and the edge of the building is the floodway boundary. And you'll see that it nips the corner. There's about 3 feet of the building that actually sits inside the floodway boundary as delineated. The 100-year floodplain is sort of cuts through the midway of the building, and then there's a 3rd line which goes all the way up to Arch Street, which is the 500-year floodplain. So in the ordinance, Brattleboro has a provision which prohibits residential uses in the floodway. So it's really the first line that we are concerned about. Although only a few feet of the building is in the floodway, once any portion of a building is in the floodway, we understand it's considered a floodway building, and therefore, under the ordinance, we are not allowed to have a residential use in this building, and that's a challenge for this building. So for those that aren't familiar with Arch Street, this building sits down a very narrow, steep street, and when we looked at repurposing this building, it became pretty clear that of the uses in the urban center, and residential use is one of those uses, it's just this floodway provision that this added requirement under the floodway, which eliminates residential use. The other uses are a little hard to have in this building because it is not on a public sidewalk. Almost all the buildings in downtown are served. You park somewhere and you walk to the building. So if I was to move my offices down here, my customers, my employees would have to park and walk down Arch Street, which is not handicapped accessible. It's not even able-bodied accessible in the winter. It is a very steep, narrow street. If you were to have industrial uses, well, you can't really load into this building. You can't get a truck if you were to bring any kind of a truck down that street. There's no way to turn it around. So you get down there, if you could get down there, you'd have some real challenges in occupying this building. So we really felt that residential use was imperative to figuring out a way to viably rebuild this building, and therefore are asking for a variance to the flood hazard ordinance to allow a residential use. So as we read and became familiar with the new ordinance has a variance provision, as all ordinances do in the state. For variances in the flood to the flood hazard district, you need to apply the general variance criteria first, and then there's a series of flood variance criteria in addition to that. So if you go to the letter that we submitted in that packet, on the 2nd page, you'll see sort of evidence submitted for compliance with the variance criteria. And I want to point out the first one, because the difficulty for variances in the general criteria, general criteria variances are tough in Vermont in general, and they're probably close to impossible for a use variance. If I was in the industrial zone and said I wanted to put a residential use in an industrial zone, I probably wouldn't be able to meet this first criteria, because the criteria relates to a physical condition. If you read that, it says that you need to have a unique physical circumstance or condition that's particular to this property, not normally found in the district. And we think that Arch Street is a unique physical condition that makes it a hardship to not have residential use in this property. So those access issues of accessibility for pedestrians or truck movements really needs to have a use in this building. There are a few parking spaces down there, and a residential use would work. So you can see in our submittal that, again, we think that unique physical condition is a steep, narrow alleyway, which is fully constrained. It's not ADA accessible. You can't get delivery vehicles. It's a hazard, and so on. So if you keep going, and again, I won't read all of these to you, that the physical conditions obviously prevent the property from being used. Again, we need to meet ADA access code, or we'd like to if we were to repurpose this building for something else. So this residential use, we think, is necessary to enable a reasonable reuse of the property. We didn't create the hardship. We can't change the hardship. We don't, there are buildings constrained on both sides. We can't modify the slope or the width. We're not going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I would submit that we're going to improve the character. This is a graffiti derelict building with vagrants down there. This is really the way to put this back and contribute to the community. And then the last one that is that the will not substantially or permanently impair the lawful use or development of adjacent properties. Again, has no effect on properties adjacent, upslope, downslope. These are all existing historic properties in the urban center, and we're really just trying to reuse an existing building. So there's a couple of others that have been added. There used to be 5, now there's 7. It's not detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. We're going to talk a little later about the flood proofing requirements and how this building can be made fully compliant with the flood proofing requirements for residential use. And it's the least deviation possible that will afford relief. Again, we think residential use is the only use in this district that is really viable for repurposing this building with the conditions, these physical constraints that we have that we can't alter. So if you then go into the flood hazard variance review criteria, we are a historic structure. FEMA offers additional consideration for historic structures to not fully comply with flood hazard regulations because we recognize they existed prior to these rules. We have a competing public interest in reusing historic buildings. And again, this one, we would maintain our ability to be a historic structure. We wouldn't be changing that if it's used for residential or something else. It turns out we also comply with 2, that it's a half-acre or size and less, and it's contiguous to surrounding lots with existing structures that are also in the same condition. So we're comply with item 2. 3, issued for development that is protected by methods to minimize flood damage. So as I mentioned before, we looked at this building and we've now submitted, along with this application as evidence, the flood elevation certificate, which shows that the first occupied floor is 2.5 feet above the base flood elevation. So let me back up a minute. The map shows the base flood elevation going through the building. It shows the floodway going through the building. In actuality, the physical location of those floods are not in the building. They don't reach the first floor. They're down over the edge. So we will meet the requirement to be 1 foot above base flood elevation which is a residential standard. It's also a standard for commercial if you can meet it. There are other ways to meet commercial standards. So we will be fully complying with FEMA's flood proofing requirements if we occupy this building for residential use. We are proposing to fill the basement of this building. That's to provide resilience in a flood event because the basement would be below the flood elevation. It wasn't in Irene. Irene actually only came up to the basement windows. Was there during Irene watching this building for a while. But this flood elevation is governed off of a flood in the Connecticut River, not the Whetstone. And therefore the flood elevations are quite a bit higher. So we're proposing, there is a basement, we're proposing to fill that in its entirety. We see that there was a letter from the state who had some questions about a crawl space. I think that was a misunderstanding. There's an existing slab on grade there. There's no crawl space. And as proposed, all the first floors would be slab on grades. There would be no basement. It's structural fill, which makes it resilient to flood forces, uplift, impact, all of that. We've submitted a letter certifying its resiliency in the lower reaches to those effects of floods.
Is that, that's the main portion of that building you're talking about, what you would call the ground floor, which is more or less equal to what Arch Street is, where it bottoms out down there?
No, that's the first floor. So there's a basement level below that.
It's one side of the building.
Yeah.
There's a basement below that
Yeah.
asphalt elevation where it bottoms out?
There
down
is,
there?
and that's what we're filling.
Okay.
Where it bottoms out is approximately the elevation of the first floor
Of the main floor.
of the main floor,
Yeah,
and
okay.
that's what we're holding.
Because I remember, I used to shovel the backside of something further up Main Street, but the access to there was years ago.
Right.
And somehow I shoveled those doorways there, and I always remember, though it seemed close.
You're
It
right
seemed
on the
really
road.
close.
Yeah, you're right on the road, and the
You know,
doorways
if
are
there
right
was
at
any
the
water buildup
elevation.
in there, it was sloshing at the
Yeah.
threshold, so.
Yeah. So the basement is a level below that. And if you look on the brook side, you'll see the balcony that overhangs that.
Yeah.
That's the first floor, or the street level on Arch Street. And then you'll see windows below that, and it's those windows that we would brick up and we would fill. So it's really the floor below that, which also means that in a 100-year flood event, the water level is still 2.5 feet below Arch Street. So you are dry land on the upslope side to get out of this building. You're not going through floodwaters to exit, although you probably would be, you did get your feet wet in a 500-year flood. But again, that's not necessarily the standard that we look at.
Do you, on the plan here, doesn't it show an apartment or something in the basement?
Not that no, I don't. I'm
On
not sure.
A100?
Oh, this is the existing conditions, and that's actually a loft. Basement
Left
is
on the basement.
second, third, first, basement. No, I'm sorry, that is the basement. So the stairs come down, and there is a room down there. I'm not sure that it was ever an apartment, and it's labeled that way. That's it's a pretty funky room. So that
that'll
room,
be filled too?
That's filled.
That's the room, that's
Yeah.
the basement that will be filled.
That's
Oh,
right.
okay.
And there's some crawl spaces that have pilasters adjacent to that room. So if you look at this drawing here, this is the proposed plan. That room is under this section, and then there's a bunch of pilasters that we're filling around that as well. So the entire basement is filled. No more basement. And as such, it's as I say, a fully complying building for FEMA's floodproofing requirements and your ordinance requirements as well.
Bob, just a quick
yeah.
question. Don't want to sound like an idiot, but what's reinforced fill?
Yeah, well, as you put earth fill against what is now the Brookside is an existing brick wall.
Yeah.
So if we were to backfill that with dirt, it would have a lateral load.
Yeah.
So reinforced earth is what we sometimes use for retaining walls. There's a grid system that is backfilled into the dirt. And as such, it reduces or eliminates that lateral load on the wall. So it allows us to fill up that wall, and the wall just becomes really an erosion element on the outside with no additional lateral force.
Okay.
Is that like a geotextile?
It is.
Sort of thing
Yeah.
that goes in there and weaves into that?
Yep, it just it goes under the earth, you backfill, you loop it, you just keep doing layers.
Is it fabric or is there metal to it also?
No, you actually could do it with metal, but it's generally a plastic grid is what they use, yeah. So anyway, we thought it was a clever way to not have to build a new retaining wall. The earth itself becomes a retaining wall. So the earth is stable without having to put a retaining wall in front of it. So there's a few other criteria that we've submitted evidence on, the variance criteria for floodplains. But again, I think we felt in looking at the variance criteria that the flood hazard variance review criteria, that we met those very easily. It was really the general criteria that were more challenging, the general variance criteria, which were just set up for variances in general, not specific to floods, not specific to this particular issue where it's a use restriction because of a flood. But even that, we think that roadway makes other uses of this property extremely difficult without having this variance to enable this thing to be repurposed and put back online.
Do I correctly understand that the steepness of Arch Street is what is the only thing that you argue causes the use of this property to be essentially impossible unless it is residential?
So there's actually three pieces about that.
Okay.
The steepness and the narrowness. There's a very narrow street, and the steepness is such that there's no pedestrian system able to go in there, and if it would be too steep to be ADA accessible, certainly, or even reasonably accessible. It is very steep. And then the third thing, so you have the narrowness, the steepness. The third thing is that Arch Street doesn't have a turnaround ability for large vehicles. I mean, if you drive all the way down to the Hooker Dunham, if nobody's parked there, you can kind of turn around, if you're in a car or a truck. But if you think about light industrial uses or, any uses where you have to move materials, driving a truck down there to a loading dock, for instance, would be extremely challenging, which would mean we'd have a difficult time getting those kinds of uses in this building. And if you look in the allowable uses in the urban center, there's many. There's retail, there's hospitality. And technically, I guess we could have hospitality down there. We could have a hotel, but we can't have people living there. But many of them, retail, restaurants, light industry, those office even. If I was to move my offices down there, I don't see how I could have customers coming. So it really falls back as residential as really a use that becomes pretty essential to repurposing.
So if it's dangerous for people coming to a business down there to walk down Arch Street in the wintertime, how are residents supposed to get down there, and how are they gonna drive down the street when it's icy?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Let me add to that, because what I'm wondering in addition is if it's residential and you have more than 4 units, don't you have to be ADA compliant in that situation as well?
You would, if you didn't get a variance for the ADA, but there is a small
Okay.
parking lot down there. So a use like residential that doesn't require the public to frequent it often, and that's what was there in the 90s and worked pretty well. There were 4 residential units in the space, it's actually a puppeteer, I think. It was four residential units and a puppeteer. And there's enough space in that parking lot for those people to have a car. So they would drive down, they would park, they would be able to get in and out of the building that way. I'm sure, again, able-bodied people would trek up that hill, but you're not opening for business. You're not opening up to the public at large.
Is that about how many spots are there? 4?
Yeah, maybe 5 spaces out of that parking
Okay.
lot.
So how long have you owned this property?
A week.
So you knew all this stuff going
Yeah.
into it?
What would prevent there being, say, a gallery space there?
We wouldn't put a gallery there. Again, because we can't get the public in and out of that space. There needs to be another way. There needs to be another way to get the public there before that becomes a public building. It could be artist housing. That was really the purpose that the museum was looking at. It could be private studios for artists. Artists could come in and work there and live there and do their artist work and then have shows over in the museum. But a gallery, there was a puppeteer who had shows down there, so people did walk down that street. But it's a pretty treacherous and we think not a very viable way to do it.
And the theory being that in winter it's essentially impassable even by people who are not disabled.
Able-bodied, right.
Okay.
I mean, the tea lounge, if you remember, had that basement space under the building out front, and they had a little handrail on the side of the building so you could kind of hold on to that. It's, again, I don't want to say it's impossible, just say it's just not very viable.
It's challenging.
It's pretty challenging. And, for looking at a building to make a substantial investment in it, to put it back online in the community, this building needs a lot of work to get back online and a lot of money. So those kinds of uses, although somebody might, cope or get by, it just doesn't seem like a very viable approach.
Now, with respect to what you're doing here, which is seeking a variance for a use, do I correctly understand your position is essentially the statute doesn't say we can't, and there are no cases that say we can, thus we can?
Thus we can. In fact, I've seen some cases where it's referenced that in the past. There was a case in Shelburne where it was explicitly determined that the statute does not prohibit uses per se. It's just meeting that initial criteria, that it needs to be related to a physical condition. And that's really what we're relying on.
You don't know that it was a Supreme Court case?
I don't know. I was just Googling and looking for Vermont cases for use variances. So I didn't do enough research, James, to say exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. There's nothing that we can see, in the, just reading this on face value, both what's in the ordinance and in the state statute, there's nothing specifically that says that you're limited, the variances are limited to dimensional requirements. It's really just this condition itself and a general practice where we don't apply for use variances. And we wouldn't be applying for a use variance either if it was a use not already allowed in this district. I mean, I don't think we could, if you were in an industrial zone, as I said, ask for residential, that wouldn't make any sense. This is a physical, boundary issue that we tripped with floodplain that sort of kicked the use out, which is important in this particular case.
So basically you've got 3 problems. Too steep for pedestrians to walk, not big enough parking for people to regularly drive to, and no turnaround at the bottom of the street that allows for other alternatives for vehicular access, right?
Right, at least for delivery vehicles.
And James, did you say also too narrow for, it's the steepness and the narrowness is pretty treacherous?
Makes it worse. I mean, if it was a wider street, at least you could put a sidewalk that was separated from the cars. But that narrowness, and it just adds to the dangerousness of it, and that it's, you know, barely, it's a lane, you know, it's a lane width. And if a car's driving down there and you're walking next to it, you feel pretty exposed. So,
What about emergency vehicles?
yeah, I know, it's challenging, but they do, you know, they do have access to, I don't know if the fire truck can get down there or not. I don't know, that's a good question. You know, this is the access to the east side of Main Street. We've had fires on the east side of Main Street, they've never driven down there. I don't know, it's a good question for Mike Lucasi. Ambulances, I'm sure, can get down there.
Now, we got a memo from the planning department, and they cited a case relating to the third requirement for a variance that says the applicant has not created the unnecessary hardship. And it said that the hardship is self-created where the applicant purchased the land with knowledge of the zoning restriction from which he seeks administrative relief. Didn't you purchase this knowing about this zoning restriction?
We did, but,
I could answer this.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not sure that that's, you know, it seems to me like 3 has to relate back to 1. You know, what is the cause of the unnecessary hardship? The cause of the unnecessary hardship wasn't the fact that we purchased the building. The cause is the steep access. The cause is the steep, narrow access where we can't turn a truck around. Then 3, we haven't created that physical condition, which is what we would propose. There's nothing to do with when we purchased the property.
Okay. So in your view, you would have needed to have done something to cause the steep problem or lack of access, demolish your own parking lot or your sidewalk or your railing or something.
Right.
For that standard to make it impossible for you to get the variance.
That's right.
Okay. I don't know if other people on the board have questions. I'd kind of like to open this to the planning department since I'm referencing their memorandum. Sure. Is that okay?
Right ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to open this up to public comment, and ordinarily I just take people as they raise their hands. But since we're concentrating on a sort of subtle issue here, and since there are members of the planning department which wrote this memorandum that I'm referencing, I'd be eager to hear from them so we can sort of get into this.
Is there a copy of that memorandum that we could have?
You can have mine.
It's all right, James. You keep your copy. I don't know if there's any other copies. All right, that's fine. We'll get it later. Try to follow.
Okay. Here, take mine. I can always share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
sure.
all right.
I can't find the first
That's
one.
all right. Go ahead. Oh.
Do you have yours?
I do have it.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, maybe you want to follow it if you're going to have to.
So I'm opening this up to the public comment. If the planning department wants to comment beyond what they put in their memorandum, which is helpful to us, and they don't need to, but I assume you're hearing the response now, and if you have something to add, we'd like to hear it.
Hello. Yes, I'd like to add some emphasis to particular points made in the memo and also respond to Mr. Stevens' comments. So first of all, the thing that I want to make clear here is that both under FEMA guidance and under state statute, the town of Brattleboro is not just committed but encouraged to actually adopt standards that may be stricter than the minimum FEMA guidance. The one area in which the town's special flood hazard area provisions is stricter than the standard FEMA guidance is in particular regard to residential use in the floodway. And dating back to 2007 and in response to a pronounced round of flood impacts along the Whetstone Brook and repeated evacuations, the town took clear and definitive steps to control for that hazard and that risk by establishing that there will be no permitted residential use in the floodway, and that and there will be no engineering exemptions or other procedural steps that would obviate that clear requirement. And so in this instance, what we have is an application here. It is in the urban center, but the relevant overlay here is the special flood hazard area. And what that means is that if those requirements of the flood hazard overlay are stricter than the underlying zoning, then it's the stricter standards that apply. For us, it's not a question of whether the building can be engineered in such a way to withstand certain lateral or other forces from floods, but in fact, it's a question of whether the policy applies or not. And so that's the first point that I want to emphasize. I should also point out that dating back to 2010, when the town first undertook a rewrite of the town plan, which was actually interrupted by Tropical Storm Irene and triggered a reconsideration of policies in the plan with regard to the adequacy of our response to flood hazard. The land use sections and other sections of the plan were rewritten, and it codified in policy again that residential uses in the floodway were prohibited. Again, with no exemptions or engineering standards that could set that requirement aside. That conversation and policy was made clear and adopted by the Select Board in 2013, restated in 2015 with an amendment to the town plan, and then restated and recommitted to again in the hazard mitigation plan that we have that's been now approved by FEMA, and again approved and reviewed by the Select Board when they adopted the new land use regulations as recently as a month ago. So what we have here is a constant checking in on whether this is an appropriate standard or not, and at no time did people come forward with the suggestion that there were particular districts or particular buildings, whether they're of historic stature or not, that would be viable for a set aside or a reconsideration of the application of this policy. So if you turn to the memo, we've established then that Brattleboro's stricter regulations do apply. Mr. Stevens provides a response criteria by criteria, and I just want to pick up a couple of points there. The key thing here for under state statute is that only if all the conditions are met for issuing a variance can a variance be issued. And in our review of Mr. Stevens' application, we actually found that not all the conditions could be met. Specifically, let's just go through those quite quickly. The suggestion that it's the physical unique characteristics of the site. We are concerned that in that statement there of Mr. Stevens that in fact it's the physical access conditions that prevail that trigger the request for a variance and its justification for the request for a variance. Arch Street is a Class 3 town road. It doesn't have a sidewalk. It provides access to the rear of properties on the eastern side of Main Street. There's grade level access and stairways, including to Mr. Stevens' own building, right along the railroad tracks at the rear.
At some point, did someone measure what the grade is of the top of Arch Street?
The first 50 feet is in excess of design standards. I can't comment to the conditions. What I would say that the fire department and public works have confirmed that vehicular access is challenging at best. Fire department in their memo states that they would not use the street for emergency conditions in the winter or under icy conditions. They may use it in summer with some challenges. And therefore, they're concerned about the suitability of the building for residential uses precisely because of that. Their expectation would be that, assuming for the sake of the argument that a permit was issued for residential use of the building, that it would have to be sprinkled as a minimum measure for residential use. But the key here is that it's not a requirement that the building meet ADA standards unless there's 4 or more units for residential use, because Arch Street is in fact a public way, and so there are other properties that use Arch Street for access, including residential properties at grade at the bottom of the Hookadunham building. So I guess what I'd offer as evidence is that it's currently used for access. Then there's a contradiction here. Mr. Stevens' testimony tonight, as well as in his written testimony, the suggestion is that the only viable use for this structure is residential use, but then points, and because of that, he points to the inconvenience or the lack of suitability for truck access and visitors access, customers or other people visiting an office. Yet we have a description here from the museum's application for a brownfields reuse initiative, which was recently where they recently conducted a public hearing, and it describes the proposed rehabilitation of the building in the following terms: plans to clean up the property and redevelop it for museum operations, likely to include some combination of art galleries, artist studios, event demonstration space, classrooms, art storage, and/or administrative offices.
When was that from? Or where did it come from?
It came from a statement from the museum in their requirement to publicize a public hearing on their application for a brownfields reuse initiative.
Was it recent?
Yeah, in the past 14 days.
It's part of our project. I can explain that.
Okay, I'll let him finish and
Yeah.
I'll let you
Right.
respond to that as
Yeah.
soon as.
So it's not just in the verbal delivery here tonight and the memo or the application from Mr. Stevens, but there seems to be some mismatch between the stated intentions of the museum on the one hand when it comes to the brownfields program, and then the justification for a variance tonight. You asked Chair Valenti as to whether the applicant has not created the unnecessary hardship.
Yeah, I didn't actually read the case you cited,
Right.
but the applicant suggested that the standard is different from the sentence that you quoted here, and I'd like to hear more from you about that.
Right.
Because this is an issue we don't have raised before us every day.
Right, we would take issue with the applicant's suggestion that it's the first criteria that establishes physically unique characteristics as a justification for the request for the variance. We would find that, in fact, 3 can be answered in its own terms, and that as far back as 2012, Mrs. Stevens and others interested in this property being notified by my office that the property is in the floodway, that it's subject to restrictions, including a prohibition on residential use, and that these matters would need to be resolved prior to any consideration of its subsequent use. I guess they're here tonight trying to resolve that issue, but I want to make it clear that they've known for several years at this point.
So to be clear, your position is if they knew of the restriction, that's the end of the argument,
Yes.
whether they created it or not, or whether they took any affirmative action.
I'm saying that they proceeded and purchased the property, closed on the property, in the knowledge that this property lies in the floodway and is zoned accordingly and is well known and well established, as is the restriction on residential use in the floodway.
Okay, and if you're using that standard, that would mean the only people entitled to variance are people that buy properties and then are either surprised by restrictions or something happens that causes a new restriction to apply, essentially?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So you can imagine a circumstance where the rules have changed in a fairly brief period of time, or the owner and the applicant spends part of the time out of state and is not aware of policy changes or regulatory changes, or there's been an application of a rule that means that they're no longer able to use the property for the purpose that they intended, and that they've only found out in the process of making application. I don't think any of those things hold in this instance, because the applicants and the engineer concerned have been aware of this for several years.
Okay. I don't know, do you have more you want to say? I'd like to give the applicant some opportunity to respond while we have this fresh in our minds.
I just want to draw people's attention to the fact that, again, the FEMA guidance permits the municipality to set a higher standard, and we have in this instance. And then lastly, the town's commitment on this question is well documented, as I suggested, in the town plan, the land use regulations, and the hazard mitigation plan. And our justification for its broad application and the way it's framed is associated with environmental justice concerns. And so the application of this requirement of the Brattleboro land use regulations has led to people being forced to leave their homes in the last 3 years. It's imposed hardship and difficulty on households, and we would be concerned that this would, by allowing a variance in these circumstances, we would be giving a mixed message at best to the community, and we think that that's detrimental to our larger goal, which is to make clear to the community what the flood hazards are and how they apply and how they work and what the most appropriate response is. And in closing, I'd want to emphasize that the mechanism by which you could change this requirement or seek a reconsideration of this policy setting is to have discussed it as part of the land use regulation adoption process, and the applicant and the engineer tonight were absent for those discussions. And given that we've just concluded that process, we think that it's untimely in terms of the request.
No, that's all right. Now, there's a couple of different issues that Mr. Francis addressed. You can respond in whatever order you want.
I'll see if I can remember, but really absent of those discussions after spending hours and hours reviewing that document, and that was a bit of a low blow. I'm sorry.
It's okay, but
so let's start.
That's relevant here, and
yeah, it isn't really relevant. So we'll start from the. Let's start from the policy. So the planning department, I think, is proposing that our application is undermining the policy decision to restrict residential uses in the floodway. We're not asking to change the ordinance. We're not asking to change the policy. We don't think necessarily that one should have anticipated these conditions until, the way you discover how these ordinances work is that you have an application that comes through and you find an issue, and that's what brings it to light. The policy of restricting residential uses in floodways makes a whole lot of sense in many conditions. Variances, though, you could say that you could apply that to any variance. If that is the case, if we're supposed to preemptively understand every time that an ordinance might require a variance, or rather that you're not going to comply with a variance and engage in the public process to have the ordinance make sure it comes out the way you want, then you wouldn't need the variance criteria. Why do we have a variance criteria except for when you get caught by something that doesn't make any sense? And if you look at this is an existing multi-story brick urban building in the urban center that's got 3 feet in the floodway. If this building was 3 feet further back with all of the same physical conditions, it would never have been an issue. So we have a floodway boundary. We have a good policy, a policy we're not trying to undermine. We're just asking for a variance. So back to the variance request of a physical condition. We're not saying that the building couldn't get a building permit and meet the building's itself requirements for ADA rules. You could do that. You could go down there and park, and one of the parking spots could be that. What we're saying is that in the urban center, buildings are normally afforded access to the public way, which is Main Street. All right, Arch Street is a public street, I guess. I actually didn't know that, but that's okay. I believe that. But it's not very accessible from a practical standpoint. We all know what this street is like. You can't walk. You can't park in the parking garage and expect a viable business to rent that space or, walk and have customers walking down that street. So I think it's a stretch to say that this building, take the residential use away, and this building is on par with all the other buildings in downtown. It's not on par with all the other buildings. That's really what we're saying by this physical condition is making this building unique. That physical condition makes this building unique. ADA, narrowness, whatever you want to say, it is definitely a physical condition that makes this unique from any other property downtown. The other properties don't have this constraint, this one does. And we think residential use is a much more adaptable use than other uses. I want to speak to the application that the museum has for other uses for this property. It is because we have a larger project.
This is the quote that Mr. Francis talked about.
Long-term plan for the museum is to build a much larger building that would improve this access, potentially up through the building that's on Main Street. We would never walk down Arch Street. So all of those uses are predicated on getting to this property through upper stories with a much larger investment. But if that doesn't come to pass, so that's really, we don't have that funded. We don't have that fully designed. We don't have that before you tonight. What we have is an existing building that we're trying to figure out how to repurpose and reuse as it sits today. And as it sits today, we think we need this variance to make it, to make this property useful. And then to say that because you purchased a property, I don't know, we seem to be saying that you knowingly purchased a property, therefore you give up your right to request a variance. I don't understand that at all. I mean, our right to have consideration for the provisions under the ordinance don't go away. I don't think they go away because you decide to purchase a property, knowing that it's got this. I mean, we decided to take a risk, yes, but we're not asking, we're really asking for your due consideration according to the rules of the game to say that we're entitled to this variance. And I don't know why that should be denied because we recently purchased the property. If we hadn't purchased the property yet, if we were here when we originally applied a month ago, we were actually trying to get this before purchasing the property, and we got stuck in not having a complete application, so we're a month late. I think I will say, we weren't aware, I see in the memo that the Public Works and the Fire Department have concerned about uses in this building. And they say residential uses, but it seems to me those concerns would be the case of any use. Maybe fire is more accentuated because of residential use. But we would certainly accept a condition that it will not be used for housing unless the building is sprinklered, which should mitigate any risk of fire in this building. And it will require a water and wastewater permit and a permit from the town for water and sewer connection. So these are, those concerns I think can be addressed either by conditions or future permit requirements for this project if it should go forward. Again, we weren't aware of that. We are not really before you tonight. We're really trying to deal with this issue of the use, and we will be coming back later with a full application for a project, at which time we'll work with the departments to make sure we can get through those issues. Finally, on the flood hazard, I also want to point out, if you bring your attention to the state review letter, the River Corridor Management Plan, it is also important that the state, or rather that the town, does not violate its provisions for the National Flood Insurance Program. We've said in our submittal that we didn't think that it did. In our opinion, it would not. That's been confirmed by the state review, that in terms of the floods insurance policy, this does not violate it. It is acknowledging the fact that it is an existing building, an existing encroachment. It's always there. If a different use goes in there, it's always going to be there. There's no change in the effects on the flood water. And the building occupants have really the same standard of flood protection, if not better, than most of the other properties in the zoning ordinance. Again, fully compliant with floodproofing standards that apply under the ordinance. So it is really just saying that, sometimes we have an ordinance that these things get unintentional consequences. I think in the public discussion, when we were looking at prohibiting residential uses in the floodway, I think we were thinking about mobile homes in the floodway that might get washed away, not an existing building that's 200 years old that's sitting in the urban center that already exists that we would be repurposing. Again, if the building didn't exist, we would build it 3 feet further away and we wouldn't have this issue. We're not building the building, we're trying to repurpose an existing historic building. And that's a different condition. This is a different condition, I think, than what was contemplated and discussed in the public dialogue when that policy was put in place. And we don't take issue with that policy. We think it probably makes sense in most of the cases, but that you should have the ability to provide a variance for relief when something gets snagged in that was not intended.
Okay. I want to ensure that if there are members of the public who wish to speak that are not from the planning department, they'd be allowed to do so as well. But I kind of cut the applicant off, and I want to make sure you're done before I turn that over. Okay. Mr. Chapman?
I'd like to identify myself not just as an interested member of the public, but I'm also on the board of the museum. The board named me president last June, and I'm actually speaking I'm hoping you'll recognize that the comments that I want to make are as both a resident, a long-term resident, a native of Brattleboro, who grew up here and returned here, not just short of 25 years ago,
And
to live here because the town is the town that it is.
I got you sworn in, right?
You do.
Okay.
Everything I've said is true, by the way.
That's why we do it.
Okay. Now, I know this is a technical discussion, and this is a board that whose business is technical discussions. But I think that in the argument we've just heard, we have seen the larger picture obscured by the details. And I'd like to talk about the larger picture, if I may. Going back in time, I would point out that Bridge Street is where Brattleboro's initial industrial heartbeat was. It was the railroad station being placed in Brattleboro and not in Guilford, where most people in Windham County had expected, that gave Brattleboro its initial growth in production of goods. If you'll recall, the railroad station was a central economic actor located along Bridge Street. The St. Organ Company delivered, during business hours, an organ for shipment every 30 minutes in its heyday. That area was a source of power generation. It was a source of storage of gas. It was located in that area because it was the lowest area in town, and the distribution was made easier by letting gas rise to the places where it was used, in hotel rooms and residences and businesses uphill on Main Street. This is a very historic area. In the United States today, we have seen many disturbed, derelict areas brought back to life by secondary uses, by subsequent uses, such as, let's look at the Baltimore waterfront, which has become a tourist attraction to an otherwise very deeply depressed area. And that's just one area, one example, really a nice example, because there is a parallel to Brattleboro's situation down on that street today. Bridge Street, I would ask you to imagine as being in 4 quadrants. In the very early 1970s, or just before then, I remember when I was a sophomore in high school going down to the railroad station, which was empty except for a number of empty liquor bottles, and volunteering to get involved with the recycling plan that Jerry James, whom you may recall as an active person in the area, had organized and used a volunteer labor to receive people's white, brown, and green glass for crushing and taking away to be recycled by a company in Connecticut. It was a derelict building. The town had expected to take down that historic building and build a parking lot until 2 different museum groups decided that they would like very much to convert that central building to Brattleboro's cultural and economic heart into a museum. The select board said, if you can get along and go inside there and work together, you can have it. And we've been paying the museum, the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, as a result, being the surviving entity, has been paying $1 a year since then. So for about 43 years, that quadrant, let's call it the uphill southern quadrant of Bridge Street, has become a destination. If you take a look at the museum's map of its visitors, which the museum carefully compiles every year, you'll see that about 30% of the visitors are from Brattleboro, another, help me Danny, 30% from Brattleboro.
And another 30% from Windham County, and about a third from Brattleboro, a third from Windham County, and then a third from beyond.
So Brattleboro has become a destination not only simply for visitors, but also residents, because it's an important cultural institution. Now let's move down the quadrant and across the street. There was a pretty sad eatery there until not 2012, when the new restaurant went in there with a lot of vision, and has become so popular that it is now hard to find a parking place down there. Even in the lovely new park and parking place area that was opened up just 3 years ago. Was it 3 years ago? The ribbon was cut. It took 20 years since the 80s to make that work and reclaim the brownfield so that it could be trod upon and rested upon, even picnicked upon, by our public. It's now subject to a wonderful grant program that is clearing that area for the public enjoyment of the view of the river and the mountain. Okay, that's 3 of those quadrants. What about that 4th quadrant? Uphill, but to the north. What we have now is a building that could really round out the redevelopment of that industrial and economic heart, where Brattleboro's economic history began such that it could attract 12,000 people to live there and another 8,000 or so to live in the outlying areas, and not including the people of New Hampshire. So what we're trying to do as a museum is to strengthen the museum through expanding its operations by way of, I guess this kind of lets the cat out of the bag, we'd like to make some capital improvements to the museum building itself, the railroad station building itself, but also make use of this amazing opportunity that came to us across the Whetstone Brook. What town would want to stand in the way of taking a derelict, unpleasant site and making it useful? Let me just point out that the business day after the deed was signed to the museum got a call from someone from the West Coast asking, is there going to be artist housing by any chance there? It's a hot subject. And there are many, many opportunities that people are looking for. There are many artists who would love to be able to take a retreat and do their work near a museum in Brattleboro, Vermont, which, by way of a number of initiatives like this, has become a true destination, a desirable location. And we've had a lot of people move in and settle here for that reason. We want very much to contribute to that. I would like, as a native, as a resident, as a parent, as someone who supports the Boys and Girls Club and the youth theater, who was a bellhop in the Latches Theater as a kid, Latches Hotel as a kid, and showed movies as a kid there. I'd like to see this part of Brattleboro given the opportunity, by way of this variance, to really make something of what would otherwise remain derelict indefinitely. The variance process is really the fulcrum here. And let me point out something about the flooding. Our engineer has pointed out that the flooding issue is defined by flooding on the Connecticut River. The Connecticut River, in the worst tropical storm, in the worst storm flooding that Brattleboro has seen in generations, did not come from the Connecticut. It did not come from the Connecticut River. The flooding issue that FEMA is most worried about is from the Connecticut River, which did not move up in its elevation very much. And I would point out that Hurricane Irene Tropical Storm Irene, was not a 100-year flood for Brattleboro. The chance of that happening was 0.02%. Do the math, you'll see that that was a 500-year flood. That building's first floor was not touched. It was not touched by a 500-year flood. The damage was where there wasn't enough space between the floodwaters and the areas surrounding. So we had flooding on Flat Street, we had flooding out on Western Avenue, Marlborough Road, but we did not, where all the water flowing into the whetstone rushed past without damaging the first floor, which is what we want to use, first floor and up. I would like to say that what I'm saying is with great respect for the Planning Commission's position and the facts that it is recited on policy, but also make note that the variance is a process that is embedded deeply into the zoning ordinance that the city, that Brattleboro has. I feel that in essence, and with respect to the Planning Commission, I feel that the position that has been put in front of the Development Review Board is an argument for continuing the building's dereliction. That for these very technical reasons, in which it's argued by the Planning Commission that we should have known better than to try. That for that reason, this initiative should not go through. Let me draw another analogy. It may sound silly at first, but the analogy is to Venice, Italy. I mean, I can't imagine anyone getting up in front of the city council in Venice and saying, you know, whatever building is at issue here is in the middle of a flood zone, and it shouldn't be approved because it could flood. Now, the Adriatic Sea does flood, and people have to walk around on boards in St. Mark's Square, but people flock there anyway for the cultural treasure that is concentrated there. The analogy is that, to Brattleboro, is that yes, there has been heavy rushing water, which, despite the volume, has never encroached on the useful space of that building. That building is historically significant, not as historically significant as a ducal palace along the Grand Canal in Venice, but in Brattleboro, where the cultural heart of the town has been moving south for decades now, so that we have a revitalized Latches Hotel and Theater. We have a revitalized Wilder building, which before the set of zoning ordinances might not have been allowed, but for technical, legalistic reasons would have been prevented from being rebuilt. Might not have been rebuilt had this fire happened last week. We've had the co-op grow and become a very significant part of Brattleboro's economic fiber, a cultural center itself. We've seen that little park be tended, and we've seen the museum grow and thrive, and we've seen the building opposite the Holstein Association be built up into a fantastic modern center for education and business initiatives. What I would like to simply emphasize and conclude by summarizing is that, yes, we have seen a technical discussion, and this board could say no. I am asking the board, as a person who loves this town, and who, yes, I have a fiduciary obligation to the museum as its president to represent its interests, but I do that for a very good reason. We have a history here that can continue with strength if this board would be so wise, in my opinion, to say, you know, it's a close one, but we think you ought to have the chance to do what you're saying because it would be good, not just for the museum, and what the museum represents, even though that would be good in itself. But it would be good for the town as a whole to make it possible to redevelop a currently derelict area into a nice looking one. So I thank you for your attention to my argument and case.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from members of the public? I just want to make sure there's nobody who hasn't spoken. Okay, go ahead.
Brattleboro resident? Just ask.
Oh.
Brattleboro resident?
All right.
I'll take my direction from the chief.
Recognize you as a representative of the town of Brattleboro Planning Department. Go ahead.
So 2 comments. One is that the question here is actually not a technical question about the status of the building or its experience over the last 100 years of flood events, but in fact a policy application question. That's the boiled down version of our memo. So the question that you have before you is actually not balancing off some set of complicated technical considerations. And the argument coming from the applicants is in fact an economic hardship question. So what they're seeking from the board here and arguing is that because that, they're arguing that there's a due process right that they have to seek a variance. And that's not in question. They do have a due process right to seek a variance. Our response to that question is the ability for them to obtain a variance is resolved through case law. And in our memo, we went through each one of the criteria and provided case law to suggest that their applicant's request did not conform to the case law that prevails with each one of the criteria, where it's germane. Their argument is in fact an economic hardship argument, that there's a limited range of uses that they can imagine that they could put this building to that would be viable for them as an entity to operate. We have 2 responses to that. The first response is, because there are alternate uses contained in the urban center zoning district and available to them even though the structure is in the floodway, we have not closed off all their opportunities for economic return. In fact, their ability to extract economic value from the structure is intact, and it conforms precisely to the description that they provided in a different document about the future of this structure, not a more generally defined project, but this precise structure. And then the second point is, there is no provision for economic hardship as a criteria in Vermont statute to obtain a variance. And so other states do allow for economic hardship, where you have to demonstrate what the nature and what the scale of that economic hardship is. That's not an applicable criteria under Vermont state statute. And so I would conclude with saying that the town attorney has provided you with a memo. He steps through each one of these issues carefully as well. And I ask you to read carefully the section on economic hardship in his memo and give consideration to the case law that he also provides, which supports the position of the town.
Thank you. I think I said earlier that I would do this at the end of the meeting, but because this is a very subtle argument, I want to be careful here. I'd suggest that we take an individual deliberative session with respect to this application right now, try to make it quick, and figure out where the members of the board stand and whether we're prepared to issue a decision based on these issues. So I'll make that motion to go to deliberative session. Okay.
Second.
He seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're going to try to do 10 minutes of deliberative session. Be back here at 10 to 9. We had a deliberative session, and in that session we discussed a couple of things, but of particular concern to us is the disagreement between the town planning department and the applicant on what it really means to create an unnecessary hardship. And that would be a dispositive issue if the planning department is correct. But we recognize that the applicant has a skin in the game and the planning department has a skin in the game. And I think we all agreed that we want to review the law cited by the planning department in full and engage in our own analysis of this to try to give an unbiased decision by the DRB. We are not comfortable that the definition of the planning department from the Ray Riley Tire Mart necessarily makes sense. We want to see it in context. And we are not necessarily comfortable that the logic that the applicant offered, which may make good logical sense, necessarily comports with the law that the Supreme Court has set out on this issue of what is and what is not creating an unnecessary hardship. So I'm going to move to continue this application one meeting so that we can engage in that legal research. And we appreciate your patience tonight and spending the time on this, but it seems to me that if this issue is resolved a certain way, it obviates the need to consider a number of other things. And if it's resolved the other way, we're going to have to, and we intend to do that at the next meeting and move forward in that way. So I'm moving to continue this application, that's why. And then the applicant or the planning department are free to address that question more, or anything else that was addressed in this public hearing. We're going to come back and continue the same hearing, and it's conceivable we'll address the other criteria at that hearing. So I move to continue.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony tonight.
So does that continue A and B?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Do
it.
we make it as such?
Yeah.
So the only one that got left to go back and make a decision on is that Cersosimo thing, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Perhaps this next one we may well do. Decision on those are just reviews.
Right. Sorry, I just want to get these guys up here. The next, the next application is 2015-231 Wayne and Dixie Bailey. Could you please come up and tell us about your project?
We own 10 acres on...
Thank you for your patience, by the way. This is a bigger agenda than we generally have.
We own 10 acres on Guilford Street, and there's a 40-foot right-of-way. I assume you got what we have drawn up.
Could you just speak up a little bit?
Yep, I do.
Okay, thank you.
And we're trying to just, on the right-of-way, I want to take and put 1.5 to 2 acre lots. And there's town sewer up there now and electricity being put in by the house that's being built on the lot that's across from us. So there's a new home going up there right now.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Just have one, and I got into the picture. The 40 foot, that's the right of way coming in off the other one? Right there?
40 foot, yeah.
So the access, so you're gonna do, the road comes in this way, you have a lot here, you have a lot here, and you have a lot in the back. And the access to the lot in the back is from where?
Is still off the right of way. I want to just do an entrance between the two lots, just so I'm not landlocking our 6 acres that are left. And that 40-foot right of way is the only access to the land.
So everybody will have access?
Yep.
From that, I guess on the map it's this.
The 40-foot right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just driveways all in, and Cersosimo's building a house up there now. On lot number, I don't have it on that one, it's 10 tax map, I think it's,
63,
find it.
63.
Yeah.
I should note, my firm represents Cersosimo. I don't view this as a conflict of interest. I've had no communications with anybody at Cersosimo about this, but if you're uncomfortable knowing that, please say it now, and if you're not, tell me you're not.
No.
Okay. Are there further questions from members of the board?
Did you say the utility access comes up that right away? There's water and sewer already coming up to that house now? And those will also, that'll also access your lots?
Right,
Right.
right.
Is there, do you have for those lots, it looks like, so it'll come up and then into your 40-foot right of way, and there'll be a total of 3 different lots, really, right?
Technically.
Technically. You
There's a lot behind
create
it.
the 2 and what's left over, and then on the other side over here, on the side closer to the park, is that another lot also on the other side of the right of way?
That's the one that's having a house built right now on it.
Okay, that's your lot then?
No,
No, that's the next one?
no, that's,
Gotcha.
there's also another lot behind it. That one that belonged to Mrs. Pond when I originally bought
Gotcha.
it. That's technically a fire road originally, it was always
Through,
called.
down through Mrs. Pond's and through Pond Road or Pond Drive or whatever it was down
Right.
there, yeah. You were here 8 or 10 years ago trying to do something with that, weren't you?
Yeah, when Cersosimo was
Yeah.
approved to do their
Right.
condo, yep.
Now, the zoning administrator asked to be recognized, which usually means I'm missing something.
No, just a quick review. Under the new sketch plan, it's an opportunity for the applicant to request waivers from application requirements for the final plat approval. So, because this is making more than 3 lots on this road, the road would have to be improved to a laneway, which has requirements, and to meet those requirements, you'd have to have some design details for the roadway. It's also an area of steep slopes, so that may come into play when you come into developing the parcels. So you need to delineate where the houses are going to be built and whether you could access them within the natural resource design standards. So contour details and road details might be required for subdivision application.
I didn't understand what he was saying.
What he's saying is that if we're going to approve this application, it's appropriate for us to attach some conditions to to our approval to address the situation when there's eventually some building here, because the lot poses some potential problems, and when it is built, we're going to attach conditions that would require it to come back to the zoning administrator.
This is the same thing I went through before. Cersosimo's planning on tiring the road. Never heard a word from them. All of a sudden I noticed there's a house being built. They're gonna tire the road and they're gonna grass in the rest of the right of way.
Well, they're not before us tonight. I don't remember the application if there was one, but all we're doing is looking at your application and whether.
Well, how come there's any stipulations on the house that just got built?
I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know
This
anything
is the
about it.
same thing I went through before. I paid taxes on that for 20 years.
We
To
just
do
want to be able
something
to sell
when I
those 2
retired.
lots at this point.
The reason why I
that's
didn't come back is because they came up with the same stuff before. And then all of a sudden, Cersosimo is building a house there,
I totally understand.
and my lots aren't worth anything.
all. All right, okay.
If what Cersosimo was doing was illegal, I assure you that Brian would be the first person telling them that he's going to be fined.
I put a permit in, never heard a word from the town of Brattleboro. They sent me back my $300 check. And I wouldn't be at this meeting tonight unless I came down and checked to see if we got on this agenda.
Well,
And where does this come from all of a sudden?
let
The
me
same stipulations.
let let the zoning administrator speak to this in a bit more detail.
Sure.
I mean,
Hold on.
It's all right, sir. This is an opportunity to discuss what level of detail you have to go into before you hire a surveyor. It's an opportunity to say you don't have to provide absolutely every detail required by the zoning code if you think there's special conditions.
It's been surveyed already.
All right,
Hold
that's
on.
great.
Wait a second. We're gonna let you say every piece you want to say, but what he's trying to explain to you is that he's trying to make this easier for you. So listen to him.
Okay, so what happens is, this is a sketch plan. This is when you get to talk to the board about what they're going to require for your final subdivision approval application, and that'll be another meeting. If you want to ask for a waiver of the requirement for the road designs for the part of the Cersosimo driveway, you can do that now, which means you don't have to re-engineer that. You can say that's a pre-existing condition. Then you have to have, how detailed is your survey? Does it have contours on it?
I've got,
Does it have
and they gave me a problem when I brought them down. They said, what are you bringing these in for?
Okay,
So I left them home.
okay.
And I've let it set for another, ever how many years ago this was.
Okay, so then on those, you should.
Technically, wasn't I supposed to get a letter in the mail saying that there was a house being built there?
No.
Why?
Because it's not a requirement of the state.
All budding property owners have
Hold
to.
on, hold on.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into this other Cersosimo house because it's not here tonight. And
Well, they're landlocking my land right now by tiring it and by grassing it in. And you cannot landlock a piece of property in the state of Vermont.
if you think it's illegal,
You know what he told me?
hold on. If you think it's illegal, this is also the person who enforces people who are violating their permits or the town ordinances relating to
I
zoning.
asked about it 2 weeks ago and not a word.
Okay. I assure you, there is nothing this board can do. We can't affirmatively act on anything other than the applications before us. Your application is to do this subdivision, and that's what we want to address. I understand the Cersosimo people are pissing you off with whatever they're doing up there. I get that, and I'm not asking you to like it. But what we're trying to do, we don't want people coming to us for unnecessary stuff that is not a problem any more than you want to be in front of us. And what Mr. Bannon is trying to do is to make this more efficient for all of us, I promise you. Please continue.
Okay, so this site is a steep site, or is it flat?
It's flat. 2 acres are, they got a little slope to them, but they can be flattened out the same level as what Cersosimo just did.
Okay, and from the survey that you've had done, you can tell from the contours that they're flat. Right. So, James,
So what waivers would you suggest that we do to make this a little bit easier for Mr. Bailey going forward?
I don't think he should be required to do road improvements for the portion that's a driveway up to the Cersosimo home.
Okay?
I think they should have at least a sketch of any road improvements that are going to be required going beyond that to these two new lots.
Okay?
And he should show where the houses are going to be on that survey. Basically, it's a building envelope, so the general area where the house would be built eventually.
Okay.
I didn't understand
And
it.
then we should sit down
What
and-
he's suggesting is that we approve the application and that there be a condition that you have to give him certain information, including a plan that has the topography, but that we not require road improvements except for that you sketch your new road for us or for him so he sees where the road is going to go, and that you put something on the plan that shows where the houses are going to be built, or if you don't know exactly where they're going to be built, a section of land where you can say, I don't know where the house is going to be built, but it's going to be in this rectangle somewhere. So those are the conditions that Mr. Bannon is suggesting we attach to our approval. That's going to allow him to determine whether what you do after the subdivision is legal.
So, because it's sketch, there isn't a formal decision, but those waivers would be entered into the minutes.
Okay, that's fine. So I just want to open this for public comment. I don't think there's any public here to comment on this application. Everybody on the board understand more or less what's going on? Is there any further comment from people on the board? I think we're ready to entertain a motion to approve this application.
Good. Just make the comments that you want to put into the minutes. So
Okay, we'll approve the application, and I'll note for the purpose of the minutes that we're not going to require any documentation of road improvements where there's a present driveway, but that we're going to ask the applicant to sketch what driveway is going to go beyond the present drive, and that he show either where the houses are going to be or the envelope in which the houses might be built. So moved? Okay, second?
Second.
Any discussion? Fairly well understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so what would the next step be? Will we get something
Well,
in
we have to
writing
vote, we
that'll
have to
tell
vote
us?
yes. I just want to make sure that if you want
Well,
to...
the thing is, my main concern is that we're leaving to go away for the winter. And I know when I get back, that driveway is gonna be tired.
Right, then.
So if I go and put 2 lots for sale, they're not gonna be able to get cement trucks up there.
We can't do anything with anything other than applications
Right, no, that's
before
fine.
us. I mean, if you tell me that someone is doing something horribly illegal, I'll tell you that you should call the police. If you tell me that someone's paving a driveway they shouldn't, I'll tell you should call Mr. Bannon. All we're gonna do here tonight is look at the application,
All
okay?
right.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the application passes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next application is 2015-243 Brattleboro Music Center. I did something horrible and I told the Brattleboro Music Center applicants they were after our last application. And please accept my apologies for making you think you'd be up slightly sooner than you were. I guess I should note, I have a child who is in one of the Music Center programs. I don't think it creates a conflict of interest, but I'll disclose it on the record.
I also have a sister
So here we go. I shouldn't have
who's
said
in the
it.
orchestra, and, but we haven't talked about this.
And I have a daughter who's taking violin lessons at Brattleboro Music Center.
I'm so happy to be here.
So, please, tell us about your project.
Okay, let me just, first of all, let me just introduce the members of the team here that are here to discuss it with you. I'm Monroe Whitaker. This is Austin Smith, the architect for the project. I'm a partner with Scott Simons Architects in Portland, Maine. We have Gene Giddings, who's the board president, Mary Green, who's the managing director, and Robin Sweetapple, who is a member of the building committee. And I think the first thing that we'll do is have Ms. Giddings speak to how the project has gotten to this stage and what the board, what the Music Center is looking at doing. And
Yeah, the people who watch on TV can't hear unless you're in front of the microphone, even though it does nothing in this room.
I'm really just going to say really briefly that Monroe and Austin are going to be handling our application, but we've come here today because we have a purchase and sale contract with Winston Prouty Center for Child Development to purchase their building. Before that building can close, we need to do what would be our due diligence and really look at this building and see if it's something that will meet our needs. We're very excited about it, I'm sure it will, but we need to know that we can do what we want to do at that site, that it will be okay with the town. It is sort of a domino effect, if, presumably if we can't buy this, I don't know how that will affect the Austin project. But we very much want to present to you a sketch proposal and let you provide us with some feedback about whether the project as we envision it is something that will work for us. And then we will take that back to Winston Prouty and see, hopefully, that we can go forward. We have been for many years on Walnut Street, and that site is difficult to talk about. Handicapped accessibility, for those of you who have people going up the stairs, I'm sure you can understand why we'd be very excited to get to Winston Prouty Center, which is nice and level and easy to access, and there's parking and everything else. So we'll let Monroe describe to you and Austin describe to you what the project will look like, and hopefully you can give us some feedback that will be useful to us.
Thank you.
okay, there are three things that we're looking at getting out of the meeting tonight. First of all, this is an ideal application of the sketch plan review process. The whole idea is that we can come here and present a concept and get initial feedback from the board in terms of how we meet the various criteria that need to be met or don't meet them before the Music Center spends a sizable amount of money on more detailed design fees. So what we want to do this evening is give a brief presentation of the concept that we're looking at here and get feedback from the board. And we'd hope to get feedback from the public as well, but it doesn't appear there's anybody. Jeff, you're gonna. Okay. The other thing is that this use, this will, as I understand it from the planning department, constitute a change in use. That the Winston Prouty Center is currently classified as a child care facility, not a school per se. So we will be going in as the criteria that we will have to meet, I assume, for the use would be similar to what a grade school would be in this zone district. I should back up a step here. This becomes a little bit more convoluted. This is not a listed use. A music school is not a listed use within the zone district. So what we've had to do prior to this meeting is submit to the zoning administrator an application for, I think what's termed materially similar use, and go through several criteria. And if the zoning administrator finds affirmatively that we qualify as a materially similar use, then we can go forward with this application. The use that we have submitted to the zoning administrator that we are similar to is a grade school, which is a conditional use in this zone district. So therefore, we will have to go through the conditional use review process. And I think right now I just ask Brian to maybe elaborate on that process a bit more.
Well, first I want to confirm that I have found that it's material similar in use to a grade school. So there should be permission to go forward with this application. And again, we're doing a sketch plan here, so there's not going to be any formal decisions, but this is an opportunity for the board to get feedback and give the applicants some idea of the viability of this plan. And to do that thoroughly, Monroe has provided conditional use as well as site plan sketch for your review.
And I believe within each of your packages, you should have what I think we term our conditional use narrative. And that's based on this current concept plan. Like I said, it hasn't been worked out to a level of detail yet that it can really be used fully as a basis for a final determination. The other thing, this would have to be part of a warrant process for the conditional use review as well, which I don't think this particular hearing constitutes has been warned as such.
That's correct. This is just sketch.
So we're looking for feedback. We would like for you to take a strong, hard look at these review criteria that we will be presenting to you more formally at the next meeting, because if you see any potential problems here, we'd like to be made aware of it now. And then the final thing is, and we'll discuss this when we get into the architectural components. We will be requesting a waiver. We're looking at a new accessory building that footprints within this building footprint in the zone district can be of up to 4,000 square feet. Waivers can be requested for an additional 10%. And Austin will address this later. We haven't quite met the program that the Music Center would like to meet with the 4,000 square feet. We don't fully meet it even with the 4,400 square feet, but that will basically be the reason that we're looking for a waiver here. Brian, now there is a question as far as this particular waiver, and this is critically important to us as well, because once we start getting into more detailed design, the architect really needs to know the amount of square footage that he's putting into this building. And we don't want to assume that we have 44,000 4,400 square feet here that we can work with, unless there's a pretty good indicator that the board would be comfortable granting that waiver. Or, in fact, is it possible to grant that waiver this evening? Is that at all a?
It isn't, but the board could indicate whether it felt that the review criteria were met and enter that into the minutes for the hearing.
But the waiver, the formal waiver would have to be granted at that later point in time. But and like I said, this is vitally important to us, that we have a sense of whether or not you would find that extra 400 square feet to be potentially acceptable.
We reviewed an application for the same parcel last year, and I recall an abutter having an issue. And I'm trying to remember for the life of me what the issue we discussed was. Does anybody?
Yeah, mostly it was the butter, lights from parking going into the backyard. It would be.
And the lights from the circulation.
It would be
as well, right?
pretty much over this area, as I remember it.
Okay.
Was lights shining into their backyard.
Okay. Thank you.
But that's essentially, all the public comments was essentially on the budding neighbors here.
Okay. So that's what we're looking to get out of this meeting. And so if you're comfortable with us, taking that approach, then we can go roughly through the site design and then through the architectural design to give you as much information.
Sure. I was just trying to. I couldn't remember what the issue was, and I wanted to, because it's just helpful to me and trying to be helpful to you.
And we will try to meet with the neighbors between now and the formal meeting, because obviously we want to have things worked out with them before coming in with a plan that we may have to modify at some significant expense later.
There was a couple of them up through there. There was a couple of them up through there. It wasn't
Yes,
just
I think
the-
there are three that, there are only three formal letters there.
Right, yeah, right.
It was Tyler, wasn't it?
Henry.
Henry.
was the first one.
Henry.
Brewer, Henry, and
Jeff Brewer, right, yeah.
The other concern that they had, that I remember, had to do with stone. There's a stone wall there on the property along the
I did see some
edge
stone
there.
up along here.
Yeah, and they wanted to make sure that stayed there for some reason.
Oh yeah.
They were very concerned that that wall
The shrubbery, too.
stay there and that there be lots of shrubbery along that line.
Not that they have the right to tell you necessarily what to do with your property. We just remember this, recalling.
But the thing
We remember
is,
this being an issue.
this is where I think we can put the new land use regulations to good positive effect. We have certain landscaping requirements that have to be met over
Yeah.
a certain linear, and so we can use that in any way. But so we might as well use it to the benefit of the neighbors. Since really for us, we have no concern about what's happening on site from us in this direction. So we can actually, if we understand what their concerns are, we can use that landscaping that we have to, that we're required to supply anyway to their benefit.
All of the parking would remain as it is?
No, and that was going to be the first thing I was going to.
So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Right now, put it on the reverse side.
No, it's right in here.
Do we have this?
Yeah.
Right now, all the parking is in front here.
Oh, I
And then
see.
there's overflow parking right on here. I recall, I think these are 9 spaces, and these
Right.
are 27 or so. I think the number of spaces are actually in the narrative somewhere. We're looking at reducing the number of parking spaces from the 36 right here, all of which really would be visible for these homes right here, to a total of 30. And splitting the parking up, where basically half of it's in the front and half of it's to the rear. primarily be staff parking here, and this visitor and student parking here.
And if you have an auditorium, that's gonna be enough for your needs?
No.
They'll go out to the park?
Actually, no, we can come fairly close to the meeting, the need that is there by ordinance.
Right.
But indeed, we feel that we would need more than that.
It'd be the park then, right?
Yes, so currently, Winston Prouty, when they have special events, they will coordinate with the Parks and Recreation Department to get permission to use their property. We think that will be one difference between their activity and ours, is that there probably will be more need with this use to put that parking lot to use. And as such, we would propose constructing a new, one more thing. Right now, Winston Prouty Way is, in fact, a town road. It's up to right here. And it is maintained by the town. We would be looking at getting permission from Public Works Department. I've had tentative discussions with Steve Barrett, and he has no problems with a sidewalk being placed along here to accommodate pedestrians coming from the living room parking area. We would also like to put in low-level lighting to help light the way through here as well for that pedestrian movement.
Now, I see this is slightly different than our drawing.
Yes.
What are the blue highlighted areas that look sort of like retention ponds or?
That's exactly what they are. When we look at it, we've realized that the landscaping had been shown in here.
Yeah.
What we've done is replace that with where the actual existing tree line is around here. And we know that these are the lowest areas on the site, and this is where we're going to have to eventually deal with the stormwater.
Okay.
So a few other comments about the site. Monroe mentioned too, this current paving comes within 10 feet of that property line. What we've done is drastically reduced that paving and pulled it back so we have a designated 36-foot buffer. And we intend to plant that buffer just for those concerns about the headlights and the buffer, staggering some evergreens that will give a nice transition between the residential and the parking. And then it also, Monroe mentioned, we took the bulk of the parking and put it behind the building, so that, it's not a sea of parking as you transition to the public.
Will those retention areas also be where the snow storage is?
Probably so.
Yes and no. They'll probably be somewhat removed from it, or we won't be dumping snow directly into it. Here it might be plowed off into it. But here, we think we have plenty of room for snow storage. We're going to have to work out something with the town here in terms of how they're going to have placed their snow as they plow their portion here.
Yeah, right.
There are also two existing driveways that go off of this. We'll maintain those and improve those, incorporate them with the sidewalk as well.
So that curb cuts for each of them also?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure if we'll have a curb on this side, but we'll certainly have a curb on the
sidewalk
side.
side, yeah. That's a big long yellow house there that has a pool in it or something.
Right here, yes.
Other thing I want to point out on this plan is the existing building has, as we figured up, about 8,300 square feet. Under the new land use regulations, an existing building can be, the footprint can be expanded by up to 25%. What we're doing is showing a future expansion area of about 2,000 square feet back here. You will not see this on the major site plan. This is will not be part of the initial submittal, but we just want to sort of go on record and show you this is the build out for this property under the current land use regulations. And so we wanted to show that build out with a potential future expansion right here at some far point in the future. That's not at all in the plans right now. Like I said, when we come for the major site plan review and approval, that will not be on the plan at that point in time.
Where is the fence that's currently there on the back of the property? Where does that come across?
Maybe it's on the survey.
I want to just see how far the parking goes in relation to the drop off there.
Oh, well, the tree line here is pretty much, this tree line here,
And that's where the fence is right along that tree.
right along the tree line,
Okay.
yes.
I can give you a quick overview of the architecture. This is the existing footprint of the Winston Prouty that we'll maintain. And basically all the elevations will remain unchanged. The roof line we're keeping as it is. We will take an opportunity to improve the insulation if it presents itself to make it a little bit more sustainable. But we're also keeping a majority of the interior partitions. They're good, solid CMU partitions, and there are a wealth of toilets, which benefits the program of the Brattleboro Music Center. But also, a lot of the space is created for the education, for the practice space we will install. And, you know, a strong attention is given to acoustics. We work with an acoustic engineer from Boston to provide acoustical separation between these practice rooms, and that's a really important. And the building basically has really good bones. It lends itself to that. So we're very enthusiastic about that. But we do have, as Monroe mentioned, a new accessory building. This will be an auditorium space. With seating, we have 270 seating and potentially another 30 seats in a balcony. It's a freestanding building. It is connected and is planned by canopies. And one thing I wanted to raise with you is the roof structure of this. Since this auditorium is going to be a higher space, going to have a higher volume, perhaps it would have a flat roof rather than a peaked roof, given the fact that the space itself could be 20 feet tall. Just wanted to raise that subject with you for your thoughts on that. But basically, renovation here, new structure here, and connecting with the canopy. And this canopy would present a drop-off for students as we understand most students will probably arrive by car.
You're confident this can all be done without erosion issues or impairing the Whetstone Brook?
From a stormwater management perspective, we're looking at relying fully. We don't know for a fact that we can, but we feel fairly confident that we can because we have very sandy soils here and using infiltration as our means of dealing with stormwater runoff.
We haven't looked at the impervious surface, but there's a lot of pavement there now, and I'm not sure how we compare, but we might be very close to what we have existing.
And we have more by the time we look at the parking in the rear and the connecting road and the new building.
And the new building.
Yeah, it is an increase,
And,
but not a huge increase.
Is it conceivable to use pervious pavers when you rebuild the parking lot, or some type of pervious surface? This seems like a great project. I'm almost reaching to try to give you something to concentrate on. Those are the only issues I can think of.
Here we have a lot of open space. One of the best ways that we can get stormwater treatment is basically just sheet flow over land. The grass will remove it. Even as much or more so than using pervious pavement. We have very good opportunities here for simpler forms of treatment at less cost.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we don't intend to use pervious pavement.
Okay.
Oh, one question, when also was speaking about the roof line, I believe there is a requirement for new construction in this zone district that roof pitches have to be a minimum of 612.
Yeah, but you can shed it, if I recall correctly, can't you? Can it be a shed-style roof?
And if we go for something less, because I'm not sure that we need it, the existing building is flat roof, that it might be more to our benefit, and both from a cost perspective and just a functional perspective, not to have that.
Right. Again, because there's such a big volume to that space, to add a pitched roof on top of it will give it an even greater presence and the scale of that building will become overwhelming to the neighborhood, to the existing school. It just seems like if we can keep that flat, simple roof, it will work better.
That'd be more, maybe more in line with the desires of the neighbors. We don't know that, but we will certainly raise that issue with them. The question is that something that could be dealt with by waiver? Would we?
I'm not sure that's necessary. That applies to single-story structures, and given the height of the building already, that might not be the appropriate way to classify it.
What's the section on that?
It's page 234, and it's at the top of the page on the other side.
Okay, let's find in the office.
Single-story building. Oh. So this is gonna be tall enough, so it's not gonna be considered a single-story
Well, that's-
building, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So single-story buildings must have a sloped roof.
Yeah.
But because of the height, you're saying that it's a two-story building?
I'm wondering if that might be the case, if there's mezzanine inside.
There is a mezzanine. There we would have a what we call a balcony as around the auditorium space.
That might be enough then. And, I think what's maybe more pressing is the massing to make it more compatible with residential style buildings.
So it would not necessarily require a waiver.
That is correct.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask about use a little bit?
Well, hold on before we move on.
Okay.
Brian, if you look on 524, the definition of a story might make this somewhat problematic. You sure a mezzanine would get them around it? I hate to be a stickler here.
Yeah, it does say attics and basements are not considered stories.
A balcony for seating. How would that be, would that make it multi-level?
I think so. I think so.
Initially be Brian's,
Well, I'm not suggesting that he's wrong about the mezzanine. I just wanted to talk about it while we're talking about it, given that we have a specific definition. I think a balcony would satisfy that definition clearly. To me, a mezzanine is a little more challenging.
James, what is it that you're looking at? Where?
Sorry, so story is defined. It says story means the portion of the building between the surface of any floor and the ceiling above it. This is 524, number 14. Attics and basements are not considered stories for the purposes of measuring building height.
Here's another one for you. The basement will be counted as a story if its ceiling is at least 7 feet above the average grade along one wall.
Not the case here. Where it's flat side.
And the mezzanine will be considered a story if it's 33% of the floor area of the story below it.
So where'd you get that?
That's dimensional
5'4".
standards. 5'4".
Okay. Okay. Well, there you go.
Okay.
And I suppose that would really make a balcony sort of a mezzanine, and it probably would comport with that because of the size of it.
Yeah. I'm also thinking that, even if it did have a flat roof, if you have a facade detail that gives more the shape of a residential structure, I think the idea is not to have rectilinear buildings that conflict with the residential character of the neighborhood.
Great. Thank you.
I still can't find it.
So I interrupted you.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't know you weren't finished.
Yeah.
In terms of use, I'm concerned about the amount of parking and potential use of the building. Let's say you have the orchestra rehearsing there. And they rehearse every Monday. Is it going to work with the park people to do a waiver? I mean, to let you use the parking over there every week?
Well, I think we need to, speak with them about it, but my impression would be that on Monday nights, there wouldn't be a lot of computing activity, but also that with the shared, if this, becomes an issue, then they can go carpool. I think it's something that's workable. I don't think 100 people won't necessarily be bringing 100 cars.
Do you have 100 people there every Monday night?
In the orchestra, yeah.
In the orchestra, well,
Where do they park now?
they don't rehearse at
Oh, okay.
Walnut Street. They rehearse at the elementary schools.
Oh, I see. Okay.
At Oak Grove.
Oak Grove and also
Oh,
sometimes
okay.
at the middle school.
One other thing that we can do here is we have this whole area around here that we can use for overflow parking. And I just estimated, I think it will accommodate 20 to 24 additional vehicles. It's almost double the amount of parking that we have on site.
So you're thinking gravel with the cars perpendicular
I
to
don't think we
the...
would even put gravel in there.
Okay,
I
but-
think we would just, it would be used infrequently enough.
Well, I
that-
understand
that-
from talking to Lisa Whitney at Prouty this afternoon, that often the town will call upon them to use the Prouty area beyond the existing parking for big events at Memorial Park. So it's, sort of
Sure.
an ongoing exchange that we want.
Right, I understand that, and for special events, that, I think that works well, but I'm just talking about something that happens regularly. I don't even know if there's a rehearsal space big enough for the orchestra.
Our intention is that there will be. But my understanding from talking to an orchestra member, that they don't necessarily have the full 100 rehearsing every week. It might be towards the end, as you get closer to the performance, they bring up the larger percussion and sort of the extra performers.
Is it every Monday all year? It's not seasonal?
This season, it's not.
What
it's
is-
not the summertime.
So, okay, well that's important. What are the times that orchestra is happening?
They have 4 concerts a year. November, January, March, and May.
So it would almost perfectly avoid the time at which Memorial Park has really its only significant use of that parking lot. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It harmonizes, you might say.
Indeed.
Right. Very clear.
Okay, it's getting late.
Yeah, I wish that this was not our first meeting with the new regulations, because we have a certain lack of familiarity with them, as all of the applicants do. But it seems to me that the biggest issues are, you're right next to a river, and we're going to be concerned about potential erosion issues, especially because it's just down the river from that area next to Memorial Park where the whetstone's eating the basketball courts. And parking, but it sounds like the biggest thorn with parking may resolve itself. My suspicion is that parking over the summer, if the music center intends to have big events over the summer, is something we'd be concerned about. And if there was going to be some sort of restrictive condition, my guess is that it would be aimed at that.
Just so that you know, we don't typically program during the summer because we all are at Brattleboro Music Festival.
Oh, okay.
So that's not in the in our current program in the summer.
Sure. And in situations like this where we have a slightly unusual use compared to the surrounding neighborhood, I would say we're very encouraging of screening and the use of landscape to try to make things mesh as best they can. And to me, the idea of a flat roof is not a big deal. I don't know if the other people on the board disagree.
I think it'd make more sense, actually.
Yeah. So.
Has anybody had a chance to review, once again, all of the criteria that are related to the conditional use approval that you will have to, if you could just, what they are, their compatibility, the character of the area, capability of the site, traffic, vehicle access, and circulation, parking and loading, pedestrian access and circulation, landscaping and screening, stormwater and snow storage, we've discussed renewable energy resources, energy conservation, exterior lighting, which we haven't touched upon, but we will meet the.
Everybody has to conform to the same standards, and when you come before us, we'll say, does this meet the standard? And
Exactly. There doesn't seem
snow
to be
storage,
any-
the snow storage thing, now that you mention it, I think it's going to be important to deal with that. Because we're not going to want big piles of salty snow right on top of the river.
Yeah.
Where they'd be draining down into it. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just to,
I was just going to go over the final. If you just go through them and see if anything catches your eye that you might have some concerns about, it would be greatly appreciated.
Just, I don't know how much night use there's gonna be other than rehearsals. But I think the neighbors did want the parking lights to go off at a reasonable hour. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you're very much right.
Yeah.
Well, the evening use will be rehearsals, will be ensemble rehearsals. There's some instruction that happens. Now, typically, that seems to wind down by 8 p.m. But there are evening classes. One of our intentions with the new space is to offer more classes, which means that we're going to better use of instruction time. But we're also targeting daytime classes for adults and seniors.
The neighbor's concern primarily, as I remember, it was like not all night lighting out there, that it goes off.
We can do that. We can have light controls that turn it off at 10:30 each night, and you could have the flexibility. If you had a late night, you could override it, but it could go off at a reasonable hour.
Motion sensors, security.
Screening can go a long way too. Or if you could cast it away from the adjacent property to the
And having heard
South.
your comments about the headlights directed to the neighbors, we could even shift that drive so that parking comes into the building.
That could potentially present a problem with the fire department here. This
Right,
is
okay.
what they really prefer to have unfettered access to.
To the building.
Is that a fair? I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Okay, then could we get your input about the extra 400 square feet? Is anybody?
It seems quite appropriate for the use you guys are using, and I was sort of shocked that this wasn't zoned as a private school to begin with. An auditorium in a school building, pretty natural. There you go.
Okay.
So we just talked to the neighbors.
Yeah.
We'd like to, we want
Barry suggested earlier that maybe the proposed business be part of. Yes, we were.
I'm not certain.
I think Austin probably needs to answer this.
Can you come up to the microphone so that you're on the TV? It's all right. It's okay.
My concern is that we have opened the opportunity to consider additional bump out, as part of the design, and after we've had, because we haven't yet had a chance to sort of revisit the details of our original plan, and to make sure that the studios, et cetera, fit exactly as we hope. I want to make sure we can take that off the table.
I think what you're saying is we want to verify that the existing footprint can accommodate all of the program.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
So
I don't want to
okay.
take the extra.
Right. And we haven't investigated very thoroughly each and every piece and component, how it fits within that building, just to the very shallow sketch plan level.
I would be surprised if the conceptual idea that we're not really getting into that deeply I would be surprised if any of us on the board consider it a bad idea. Brian, they're doing their math correctly?
Yes.
You know, as long as it is not infringing on adjoining parcels and out of the setback and pretty consistent with the main building and not creating unusual new parking or traffic pressure, I would imagine, I cannot imagine any obvious hurdles for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for coming. Thank you for your patience. Okay.
Yeah, and then we have to vote on the, we have one we deferred to vote on.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
You guys do, not me.
A deal, then a deal.
See, he gets to go home again. Joe has to stay.
That's my game. So the last applicant is 2015-250. Is it Lisciotti or Lisciotti? Lisciotti. Development. And as soon as they're out and you come in, I've got to swear you guys in, okay? Right when he's done, set up at that table. You can use the easel if you have something you want to show it. Just remember, we're on public access television. It's always a little bit of a tricky thing, but if you could try to position it so our cameraman can get what you're showing us as we look at it, we'd appreciate it. Yeah, we did. Okay, so first, could you just tell us who you are?
Austin Turner with Bowler Engineer.
Okay.
John Scribner with Lisciotti Development.
Okay, so I'm gonna swear you both in, okay? Do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the cause under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes.
Okay. So could you tell us about your project, please?
Yes, sir. We are proposing to redevelop the existing vacant Friendly's facility on Putney Rd with a new O'Reilly Auto Parts facility. The new building is approximately 7,200 square feet. We are here before you this evening as kind of our preliminary discussion with the board. We wanted to solicit some feedback on the application before we really pin the design down. And we're getting to a point where the technical stuff's going to start coming together pretty quick, and there's a couple of points of relief that we'd like to discuss with the board and get some input on this evening. We're currently anticipating the need for 2 waivers and then a variance relative to building height, and I can work through those in a little bit of detail tonight and just get your collective take on our project and how that's going to come together. From a development perspective, the layout's fairly simple, and in fact, we're going to be reducing the impervious coverage quite significantly. We're anticipating a reduction in impervious surface of about 16%, give or take, which is, I think, fairly beneficial on such a small piece of property, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that corridor. It's got a lot of pavement. In that regard, that's going to be, I think, a pretty good benefit. If you'd like, I could kind of work through what we're seeking in terms of relief. I know the new ordinance was just recently adopted, so that there's probably a little bit of unfamiliarity in that regard, but hoping we can work through that together.
I think we're probably going to be less useful to you tonight than we would any other night, but we got to start somewhere, so by all means, please.
Okay. So with the site plan that's before you on the easel there, the first point of relief that we're hoping to for is the lot coverage. Currently, the ordinance allows for 60% lot coverage. We're going to be a shade over that at about 62%. Existing is about 78. So as I mentioned, we're reducing it quite significantly. I believe the way the ordinance is structured, it allows the board to grant a waiver if we're within 5% of the requirement. And obviously, being at 62, we're within 5% of that requirement, and we feel, although we're over, it's a benefit because of the reduction that we're going to be seeing from the existing condition.
Can I ask you a quick question? Did you get the memo from the planning department?
In what regard? Review?
We got a memorandum on your application, and I was going to ask you about a couple of things as we get into it, and I just wanted to know if you had a copy.
I haven't seen it.
It was just finished at about 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Okay, let's get this in front of the applicant. It's no huge surprises here, but I just want to be able to have it back and forth.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, no problem.
You have it? Oh, that's
Yeah.
So continue, please.
Yep. The second item with which we're seeking relief is going to be relative to the 20-foot minimum side building setback. So as you're looking at this plan, it would be the northwest corner of the property. That's by design, and the reason being, we could adhere to the building setback by pulling the building forward and closer to the road. In doing so, we would be encroaching into the landscape buffer along Putney Road, and it wouldn't afford us the opportunity to provide some additional landscaping along Bradford Ave or that back corner of the property. In our mind, seeking a waiver for a building setback encroachment versus a parking setback and landscape buffer encroachment is a softer one of the two, seeing as we're abutting a wooded area and another commercial use.
Are you talking this side here?
The back corner, that's yeah. Well, that whole side of the building would be in that setback.
Hey, isn't there a stream over there?
There is.
How close is it to the building?
I'm not sure the distance, but we're staying within what was previously paved.
Just as a heads up, if you put that stream on whatever plan you eventually submit, that's very helpful to us.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be on that.
It's more than 50 feet.
Okay.
Brian, I only have page 1 of the planning department's memo, and I don't know if other people do.
No, I only have.
It ends abruptly. In order to be granted the variance, do we have the rest of that? And none of us had this memo until today either, so I'm just
okay.
trying to
We can work through it.
So the Friendly's building is coming down?
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
And we're actually trying to, our development, we're trying to limit to what was previously developed, stay within the previously paved footprint, but reduce what was paved as well and replace it with landscaping.
Okay, so
that reduction in incremental coverage is from a combination of a smaller footprint and increased green space?
Correct. So the building might be a little bit larger, but we were consolidating the paved portion of it too, and making it more.
Moving some paved.
Yes. Trying to make it more efficient.
that's very helpful. We had a couple of other people near that brook do that, and, because the brook is impaired. Do you know how much you're removing roughly?
I don't know square footage, but our initial calculations were about 16%. So over the site's just under 9/10 of an acre. So it's pretty significant.
Will those propane tanks in the back be staying?
No, we would anticipate replacing those.
Gotcha.
What are you thinking about snow? Where are you gonna put it?
I hope we don't get it.
Well, me too. Actually, I hope we get it.
We actually, you can see on this plan, we have a fair amount of landscaping area that we're leaving. I think this area in the back corner would be a good spot to push snow. And then minimally along the perimeter, but also potentially along the front where it wouldn't impede visibility for motorists entering or exiting the driveway. But that rectangle out back would be probably the primary location to push it.
And then which way does it drain from there?
Generally, the site has existing condition today. There's a couple of drainage structures that are on site here and here. That stormwater is collected and then piped out back, straight piped out to the ditch or the stream, the brook. What we're envisioning doing is a closed drainage system similar to what exists today. We're looking at putting a shallow depression out back to direct rooftop runoff in there and detain and infiltrate as much as practical before it gets discharged into the brook. So today, there's no treatment. You got a couple of catch basins and a couple of pipes, and then it gets discharged directly. We're hoping to attenuate some of the flow before we discharge it into the brook and allow some infiltration, whatever the site will allow. The dirt out here is less than desirable. It's structurally, it's not very good. In fact, we're going to have to do pretty substantial foundation upgrades to redevelop the property. And because of that, the dirt's not all that receptive to stormwater, but we'll do what we can to infiltrate as much as it will allow.
When you say infiltrate, do you mean like actually install those underground infiltrator, subsurface drainage storage systems? Is that
we've looked to do
it.
it.
Put them in at 99 up the road. That's what it was completely underneath the parking lot.
I think in this particular instance, because we have the ability to use some of the land without putting it into the parking lot, we're going to try and do it above ground. We'd excavate, what we're looking at doing conceptually right now is excavating a shallow basin behind the building.
Like a retention detention sort of?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And then direct the roof leaders from the runoff from the rooftop into that
all
basin.
the surface would just flow to that?
Maybe not all the surface, but as much as it would allow. Yeah. Yeah.
I know in the winter, a lot of water pools up right at the entrance, especially the one by the mailboxes, the northernmost entrance to that property.
We're going to try and correct that. What's happening there, we were out there last week during a rain just to kind of get a feel for drainage patterns. The gutter line's not really properly formed, so you get a low spot at the driveway, which you get a 33-degree day with sunshine in January. That's going to melt and refreeze, and that's not safe. So we're going to try and correct that condition as much as we can by reestablishing a gutter.
Can you talk about the building height issue?
Certainly. That's the item we'd be seeking a variance from.
Right.
The ordinance requires a 24-foot minimum building height. I can show you what the architectural elevations, at least what O'Reilly has provided to us in terms of what they're pursuing for what they're contemplating for a building. This is what O'Reilly provided to us in terms of their initial asset architecture. It is different from the prototype, but we would be seeking a variance for the building height. O'Reilly's building, what's shown on that board, is 19 feet to its highest point. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, architecturally, their building is only about 80 feet wide. If you go 80 feet wide and 24 feet high, all of a sudden it becomes this almost rectangular column as opposed to more of their building. The way O'Reilly works as well, just nationwide, their buildings, structurally and architecturally, they're designed like that. It's believe it or not, you go an extra 5 feet and it presents a pretty significant deviation. It's all new building materials, all new setup, all new steel order, foundation systems. In this particular instance, actually, the dirt out here is pretty loosely compacted, and it's very susceptible to liquefaction, which means that it's going to have an upgraded foundation system, substantially upgraded. We're looking at piles or rammed aggregate piers, which is a pretty expensive item to make this building come together. So in consideration of that, and then working with some very smart people who design these things, they said they prefer to keep it in concert with what they've done previously, so they're not reinventing the whole architectural and structural arrangement for this building.
So what you're getting into is possibly the only thing we have experience on with the new zoning ordinances, which is variances, because we just got into this with an earlier application. And a thing that you should be mindful of, and it sounds to me like you may be actually able to do this, is the need to show the unique physical circumstances requiring the variance. And in your letter, you mentioned landscaping and sort of being able to mitigate or make the building look nicer, which does not get us where we would need to be in order to grant you that variance, maybe a waiver, but not a variance. If you look on figure 4.2, which is on page 411 of the new zoning bylaws, you're going to need to show unique physical circumstances that they prevent development by strictly conforming to the regulation, which is in this case the height requirement, that you didn't create the unnecessary hardship, and I doubt highly you guys went in there and inserted this terrible dirt.
We try not to do that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that would be kind of clever on your part, but
It'd be an expensive idea, though.
That it doesn't alter the essential character of the neighborhood, which is, of course, a fairly commercial district as far as this town goes. That it won't impair the use of adjacent properties, and obviously a building being too short is not going to mess with the neighbors. That it's not detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. I can't imagine how it would be. And it's the least deviation possible. I think if you could make a good showing in the record, whether it's through you or some expert, that the increased weight of this building would essentially make development impossible because of the low quality of the aggregate or soil or whatever it is that's under it, that you are one of the rare applicants that could fairly appropriately meet this general variance standard, which is a high standard, and which is why we're here so late, because this was really it caused a lot of difficulty in one of our earlier applications. So my advice to you would be, we like landscaping, you should talk about landscaping, but if you want to get over the building height hurdle, you're going to have to make that argument that it's really necessary because of the conditions on the parcel, I think.
Okay. So not tie the two together or show the connection between the two to help support our case for relief.
If you show us that a 24-foot, is it 24 feet that's in there?
24, yeah.
If you show us that 24-foot building is not going to work on that soil, with a 19-foot wood, I think that's a pretty powerful argument for general variance. And all these other things that are designed to protect abutting landowners or the general public from these sort of specious variances, they don't seem to me to apply to you. I mean, This is a rectangular block building. It's not that different from the other rectangular block buildings that are already there. Abutters are aware of what Putney Road
Right.
contains.
So we can talk about that, and we'll have the architect can speak to that. It's a combination of factors with the building height. It's one, just the architectural appearance, which we can put, the architect can describe why the ratios and things like that are appropriate. Mm-hmm. But coupled with that, knowing that the foundation upgrades are going to be so significant here, there's that component and wanting to minimize how much upgrade we're going to do, which plays into the financial impact. There's a lot of reasons why that comes into play, and we can certainly elaborate on that as part of the formal application.
I can tell you the way this is written, I think your structural arguments are going to be much more persuasive with respect to us and the law than the aesthetic ones. Not that I don't understand that this building would look strange if you suddenly added 6 feet. I get that, or 5 feet, whatever. But to get a general variance, you have to hit some pretty narrow guidelines.
Okay. Sounds like we might be able to fit in that group.
I think you might.
Yeah.
I think you might get someone with a license to say that, and that seems to me to be enough.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. Those points are the three we'd be seeking relief to enable us to move forward with the program that we're proposing for the property. Do any of those, we talked about the building height. Do the other two warrant or want to have any discussion? From your perspective, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on the other 2 points we're seeking relief from.
The 2% maximum lot coverage, the fact that you'd be improving the stormwater treatment over the prior parcel is very helpful, and I think anything you can do to show us that this is going to improve the water that heads to the Crosby Brook, it's going to make that less and less of an issue. But 2% doesn't exactly raise red flags for me. I don't know if you guys disagree, but. I felt the same way with the setbacks.
I think the setback for us is kind of part and parcel to the landscaping. It enables us to maximize landscaping. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that relief from the landscaping and parking setback is actually a variance as opposed to a waivable requirement. So we
That's a
were pursuing
waiver, I thought.
What's that?
Setback.
landscaping. I think the building setback is a waiver. I believe the parking setback or landscape buffer is a variance, if I'm reading the ordinance correctly.
I think
They're
it's
both
all
waivable?
Yeah, I think it's all waivers.
Okay.
Yeah, which is good from your point of view. The only way the setback might be an issue is if your butter on that side comes in and gives us a good reason why that setback is going to cause them a problem.
We were hard pressed to find one because we're separated by the brook. It's pretty heavily wooded in there, actually.
Right.
I'm showing on an aerial what that looks like.
Oh, I can't imagine sitting here. I know
They're Montos, and they're not even close.
Right. No, believe me, I spent
the boundary would be that. You can see that the woods and the brook is in the middle of that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a commercial use that we're abutting.
But yeah, because of that, I can't imagine why that would be an inappropriate waiver, especially if you show us why that allows you to landscape and screen. Because I mean, in this commercial area, the thing we want to do is landscape and screen to the maximum extent without completely blocking out the business from the sun and the cars, which we understand.
Sure.
You know, it's a commercial area, people want the business to be seen, but I think that's the primary interest of the DRB, is finding a way to do that as best we can. And if it's better off to the side and allows a little better screening, we'll probably be fine with that.
So
it wouldn't hurt to just call up Ramonto, the fellow that owns that Ramonto's parcel, and say, hey, we're thinking of doing this.
How do you feel about it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than having some person come in here, and some abutters, it doesn't make any sense what they say, but they can't come up here and speak for 10 minutes about why you shouldn't do this. And just as a practical matter, nipping that in the bud can be good.
Is there anything from your perspective, because we're kind of at the point now where we're going to crest the curve in the design, is there anything else that the board feels appropriate for us to consider as we're putting these plans together?
The parking's in the front, right?
Yeah, the parking's all right, but there's a lot more than is required.
Yeah, that's what
I
I.
think 24 spaces, and you guys are proposing something more like 34.
I think we were
32. 32.
Correct. We're proposing 32 spaces. Yeah.
Is there a particular significance to the 32 number?
Operationally, O'Reilly's kind of identified that 30 to 40 range as their sweet spot. You're not going to see that parking lot jammed full, as they don't expect it, but it's the couple of times a year where you might see it. That's kind of their. It exceeds the zoning requirement certainly, but from their perspective, that's what they like to see.
Well, it exceeds the minimum, but they're not running afoul of any regulation except the general principle that we want to have a reasonable amount of parking, right?
There has to be some.
There's a water bottle down there that
there
belonged
does?
to Mary or something.
But it's permissible for like two.
I think Mary was, I don't know whose it is.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
It could go up to twice the amount allowed, and the board could still permit it. But there just has to be some sort of justification.
Okay, so the absolute maximum then is 48. But they have to justify why it's 32 as opposed to 24. Okay. Well, you know, obviously if you don't have a going business, it's difficult for you to tell us exactly how much traffic there's going to be. But any insight you might be able to glean from similar stores, maybe in similar sized towns, you can say this is how many cars we have, and we need this many because, you know, Joe Schmuckatelli takes up 2 spots most of the time trying to put a light bulb in or whatever.
Whatever, yeah.
That would be helpful.
Or the need could be something like whatever you have the drag race car come, or the radio station or something like that, special events, you'd have more people parking there then, I would think.
Okay, you're right, because they might take up
More than
6
that,
spaces or
sure.
something, whatever, yeah.
But, yeah, you got to give us something in the record, some reason. If
Okay.
if you're going to get that, it needs to make some sense. It occurs to me, it would be nice if there was a way to get the, whatever drainage comes off that roof to go off the side that the brook is not on.
We were anticipating, the way the building is structured currently, roof leaders would be off the back.
Okay.
And we would direct them into, what we're planning to do would be a stormwater basin.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be, we're not anticipating that off the roof would be a direct discharge into the brook. We do as much detention as that back would allow,
Sure.
and then infiltration. Like I said, the coils out here aren't great, so you're gonna get limited infiltration, but any, I think, is better than none.
Sure.
So,
Any way to keep it in the brook is something that'll stand in good stead with us.
okay.
Is that silt right there?
It's a combination of materials. Yeah. And it's the stuff that's easily, like, part of the reason for the upgraded foundation is that there's earthquake guidelines that have been designed against. This dirt likes to get loose really quick.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you get differential settlement and buildings fall apart, and that's not good.
I did a project further down the road years ago, and I remember the soils.
Yes.
Does anybody else have comments regarding these 3 issues that I've not addressed? I think it might be appropriate to let these gentlemen go home, unless you have further questions.
I want to make sure, I want to use this opportunity, I know, trust me, I'd like to get home.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to make sure that when we come back to an application,
Right.
it's comprehensive. And we've talked about the issues so that when we come here, it's as efficient as possible.
Am I missing anything, or have we not addressed anything that was raised either by their memorandum to us or our planning department's memorandum?
No, I think, they've made a rationale for the waivers. For the coverage, it's maybe bring it into conformance for the maximum extent possible, so maybe a waiver isn't even required because it's a developed site. For the setback, there's clear benefit as far as being able to landscape along the driveway as well as the front. Variance, of course, are always a little bit.
Right, that variance is going to be the biggest problem if you're going to have a problem.
Okay.
So the more stout your argument
Which
is.
one? There were 3 different ones.
For the height.
Okay.
For the height.
I think two are waivers, one, the building is a variance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's right, he's right. And I have no opinion on the height of your building. I'm saying that because the standards we look at, the variance is much harder.
So when we frame up our request for the variance, well, I'm not suggesting it's a foregone conclusion, but our arguments for that will be based on the criteria set forth in the guidelines, and we'll just enumerate all the points
Yeah.
as we believe to be consistent with that requirement.
Yeah, and the most important one piece of information with these guidelines that's concrete is if you have someone with some expertise saying this really needs to be this height, not that height.
Usually we just fake it.
Well, if they're licensed.
That's not on the record, I'm just joking.
If they're licensed, they can either tell us the truth or lose the license, but, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to see specifics too, on just what they're gonna do to remediate the runoff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, our application will be it'll be many pieces of paper with a lot more detail than that.
You have a
Reports that
stormwater
come
runoff
in.
plan, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Was there a second page to the memo? It seemed like it.
Yeah.
I have the only second page.
Oh, okay.
Can we just resend that memo around for people's information? This is the only full copy we've got.
You can email it to us.
Okay.
So you're done now.
I think I'm done. You're all set?
I'm okay, if provided the board's okay.
Board's okay.
Yep.
All right.
Board's okay. This looks pretty good.
We appreciate your time this evening.
Right?
Yeah, I appreciate your patience.
Thank you. No problem.
Up here, you're gonna drive yourself?
Driving back. I'm heading.
Joe, don't we have to vote?
Yeah, you have to do Cersosimo.
Aye.